He rode 500 miles to bury his mother and arrived 3 days too late. Now the town she gave her life to is being strangled by a man who wears his greed like a Sunday suit. And the woman who might save them both is carrying wounds she never asked for. This is the story of Caleb Holt, the man who ran from everything and finally ran out of places to go. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far Caleb's journey reaches. The grave was still fresh. Caleb Holt could tell by the color of the earth, dark reddish brown, where the soil had been turned, not yet bleached pale by the Texas sun, the way it would be in another week or two. A simple wooden cross marked the head of it, the letters carved deep and careful by someone who had cared Dorothea Ann Holt. Beloved mother, 1821 to 1878. He didn't get down from his horse right away. He sat in the saddle for a long time, hat in his hands, sweat running down the back of his neck in the August heat, and looked at that cross with the kind of stillness that isn't peace. It's the stillness of a man who has been hit so hard he simply cannot move. The cicadas were screaming in the mesquite trees along the ridge. Somewhere behind him, the town of Harrow's Bend was waking up, wagons rattling over packed dirt, a dog barking at something it would never catch. The world kept going. It always did. Caleb dismounted slowly. His legs ached from 5 days in the saddle, 5 days of pushing his horse through Kansas grasslands and Oklahoma dust in the brutal emptiness of the Texas Panhandle. He had ridden the way a man rides when he's trying to outrun something that's already inside him, hard and fast and without mercy. He'd still been 3 days late. He knelt in the dirt beside the cross without thinking about it, the way his body remembered something his mind had long tried to forget. His knees settled into the loose earth, his hands pressed flat against the grave. The soil was warm from the sun, warmer than it should have been, and for one terrible moment, Caleb Holt, who had not cried since he was 19 years old, felt the back of his throat close up like a fist. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said. "I'm so damn sorry." The cicada screamed. Nothing else answered. He had been sitting in a saloon in Caldwell City, Kansas, when the telegram found him nursing a glass of rye he hadn't really wanted, watching dust motes drift through the afternoon light, trying to feel nothing and succeeding well enough. He'd been doing that for years. It was a skill you developed when staying numb was easier than the alternative. The boy who brought the telegram couldn't have been older than 12, and he burst through the saloon doors like the building was on fire. "Holt, Caleb Holt? Anybody know a Caleb Holt?" Caleb raised 2 fingers from his glass. "Here." The boy ran the telegram over like it was urgent, which it was, though Caleb didn't know that yet. He unfolded the yellow paper with the same steady hands that had once kept a 6-shooter level in a crosswind, and he read the words once and then again, and then his hands weren't steady anymore. Mother failing. Come home. Amos Greer. He was on his horse inside the hour. 500 miles, 5 days, 3 days too late. That was the arithmetic of failure Caleb had decided somewhere around the Oklahoma border. He was good at that kind of math. He'd been doing it his whole life, adding up the moments he hadn't been fast enough, adding up the people he hadn't saved, carrying the sum like a stone in his chest that never got lighter no matter how far he rode. He stayed at his mother's grave until the sun reached its full, terrible height, overhead turning the Texas air into something you wore rather than breathed. Then he got slowly to his feet, brushed the dirt from his knees, and turned to face the town he had left 11 years ago and sworn he'd never return to. Harrow's Bend didn't look like much. It never had. A main street wide enough for 2 wagons to pass, lined with weathered storefronts that had been trying to look permanent for 30 years without quite convincing anybody. A church with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left. A hotel that called itself the Garrison House with a confidence it hadn't earned. Dust everywhere, always that fine Texas grit that got into everything and stayed there. But it was his mother's town. She had lived here for 40 years, had built a life here out of nothing much, had loved this place the way some people love difficult children, stubbornly without reservation in full knowledge of all its flaws. Caleb put his hat back on and rode in. He felt the eyes on him before he reached the main street. A man on a porch stopped sweeping. 2 women near the dry goods store leaned together to whisper. A boy of about 8 stared openly from the steps of the feed store until his mother pulled him inside. Caleb kept his face neutral, his posture easy, and tried not to look like what he was, a man coming back to a place that hadn't wanted him to leave and probably didn't want him back. The Holt Ranch sat 3 miles southwest of town down a long, dusty track that ran alongside a cottonwood-shaded creek called Harrow's Branch. The property had been in his family since before the war. His grandfather had driven stakes into that particular patch of Texas earth and declared it home, and the family had stayed mostly because moving was harder than enduring. The creek was the ranch's real value, and everybody in the valley knew it. In a country where water was life, the Holt property was the difference between prosperity and ruin for a half-dozen neighboring operations. Amos Greer met him at the gate. The old foreman had aged a decade in the 11 years since Caleb had last seen him. The silver in his hair had turned to white. The lines in his dark face had deepened into furrows, and he moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose joints had accumulated too many Texas winters. But his eyes were the same, black and sharp, and currently fixed on Caleb with an expression that was equal parts relief and accusation. "You took your time," Amos said. "I came as fast as I could." Fast wasn't fast enough. Caleb didn't argue. He dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post and stood in the dust while Amos looked him over with the thorough disapproval of a man who had every right to it. "She waited for you," Amos said finally, "right up until the last week when she couldn't get out of bed anymore. Every morning she'd ask me if I'd heard anything. Every morning I had to tell her no." The stone in Caleb's chest got heavier. "I didn't know she was sick." "She didn't want you to know. Said if she told you how bad it was, you'd come out of obligation, and she'd rather die than have you here for the wrong reasons." Amos shook his head slowly. Stubborn woman. Lord, she was stubborn. "I know." Caleb's throat was tight. "How long?" "Her heart started giving out last winter. She had maybe 6 good months, then 3 bad ones. Dr. Fenwick from town was useless, gave her tonics that made her worse, and charged her double for the privilege. It was Miss Calloway who kept her going as long as she did. Vivian Calloway, came to town about 2 years ago from back east Philadelphia," she said. "She's a doctor, a real one, trained proper, sets up in a little clinic on 2nd Street. Amos paused, something complicated moving across his face. "Your mother thought the world of her. Said she was the most remarkable woman she'd ever met." Caleb filed that away. "What's the state of things, Amos, the ranch?" The old foreman's jaw tightened. "Walk with me." They walked the property slowly, Amos talking in the flat, factual tone of a man delivering bad news he'd been rehearsing for a while. The drought had hit hard 2 summers now, with barely enough rain to keep the creek running above its lowest point. The cattle herd was down to 60 head from the 120 Caleb remembered. 3 fence lines needed replacing. The barn roof had developed a leak that was getting worse with every passing week. "And the money?" Caleb asked. "Last winter your mother borrowed against the property, $800 due in September." "Who holds the note?" Amos stopped walking. He turned to face Caleb with an expression that was the closest thing to fear he'd ever seen on the old man's stoic face. "Silas Drummond." The name meant nothing to Caleb. He said so. "He wasn't here when you left. Showed up about 4 years ago, came from St. Louis. He said, though nobody could ever get a straight answer about what he did there. He bought the old Patterson place on the North Ridge first, then the Beaumont property after old Gerald drank himself into foreclosure, then the Kessler Ranch when the drought took them under." Amos's voice was steady, but his hands were not. They'd closed into fists at his sides without him seeming to notice. "He owns the bank now, the hotel, the general store. He brought in a pet sheriff named Briggs who does what he's told, and a fraudulent physician called Fenwick who handles anyone Drummond wants handled." "Handled how?" "Mercury pills for a stomach ailment, laudanum instead of proper treatment. 3 men have died of Fenwick's care in the last year." Amos met Caleb's eyes. "Miss Calloway knows it and has been saying so, which is why Drummond has been trying to run her out of town since the day she arrived." Caleb looked across the land, his mother's land, now technically his, though he wasn't sure he deserved it. The creek glittered through the cottonwoods at the property's western edge, silver in the afternoon light. A red-tailed hawk turned slow circles overhead. The sky was that particular shade of blue you only got in Texas, wishing and clean and indifferent. "He wants this property," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "The creek, control the water in this valley, you control everything. Your mother was the last holdout." Every other property that had direct creek access is Drummond's now. Amos paused. He made her offers. 3 of them, each one bigger than the last. She turned them all down. Good. He's not going to stop Caleb. He's not built for stopping. Neither am I. Amos studied him for a long moment. You're different. 11 years will do that. Not that kind of different. The old foreman shook his head slowly. You're harder, like something got burned out of you somewhere along the way. Caleb didn't answer. He looked at the hawk still circling overhead and thought about Kansas and the years he'd spent trying to be nobody in particular, and about the telegram in his shirt pocket that had ended that particular ambition. There's something else, Amos said. Your mother left something for you. Miss Calloway has it your mother made her promise to give it to you personally. He hesitated. And there's a letter. She wrote it last spring when she was still strong enough to hold a pen. Left it with Miss Calloway along with the other thing. What other thing? You'll see. Go into town. Go see Miss Calloway. She was expecting you before this, but... He stopped. But I was late. You were late. No. Caleb rode into town in the long copper light of late afternoon. He found the clinic on 2nd Street without difficulty, a tidy building that had once been a harness shop with a freshly painted sign above the door, V. Calloway MD, Medical Services and Surgical Care. A second line below it, smaller. All patients welcome. All hours. He tied his horse and pushed through the door. The interior was clean in a way that surprised him. Most frontier medical operations he'd seen were closer to butcher shops than physicians' offices. This place had whitewashed walls, a scrubbed wooden floor shelves of carefully labeled bottles and instruments, a real examination table with clean linens on it. A curtain at the back presumably led to a recovery area. The whole space smelled of carbolic soap and dried lavender. A woman came through the curtain and stopped when she saw him. She was younger than he'd expected. 30, perhaps 31, with the kind of face that had been beautiful before exhaustion got to it and was still compelling in spite of it. Dark auburn hair pinned back from a high forehead, gray eyes that were doing a rapid professional assessment of him, the way doctors did, not rude, just efficient. She wore a plain dark dress with the sleeves pushed to her elbows, and she was wiping her hands on a cloth that had a small dark stain on it. He chose not to examine too closely. Mr. Holt, she said, not a question. I was wondering when you'd come. You know who I am. Your mother described you in considerable detail. She moved to the shelf along the wall and began straightening bottles that didn't need straightening. She also worried about you in considerable detail. It was her primary occupation near the end. She shouldn't have wasted the energy. No, she shouldn't have. Vivian Calloway turned to face him, and there was something in her gray eyes, not cruelty exactly, but a refusal to soften what was true. She asked for you at the end. I want you to know that not to cause you pain, but because I think you deserve the truth. She missed you. She forgave you entirely and without reservation, but she missed you every day. Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked at a point slightly above her head and breathed through it. The letter, he said, and whatever else she left. Vivian reached beneath the examination table and withdrew something wrapped carefully in a piece of old quilt. She set it on the table between them and unwrapped it slowly, and when Caleb saw what was inside, he felt something move through him, a current of recognition and grief so sharp it was almost physical. The silver lantern had sat on his mother's bedroom windowsill for as long as Caleb could remember. It was small, about the size of a large jar, its sides etched with a simple pattern of climbing roses that had been worn smooth in places by years of his mother's hands. She'd brought it from Georgia when she came west, said her own mother had given it to her on her wedding day, said there was a whole story behind it. She kept meaning to tell him. She'd been carrying it across half a continent for 40 years, and now here it sat on a stranger's examination table in a Texas clinic, and Dottie Holt was 3 days buried, and Caleb Holt could not make himself touch it. She asked me to give it to you personally, Vivian said quietly. She said you'd know what it meant. She always had it. She never... He stopped. There's a letter too. Vivian laid an envelope beside the lantern. His name was on the front in his mother's handwriting, the careful, slightly formal penmanship she'd always used for important things. I'll leave you to it. She moved toward the curtain at the back. Wait, Caleb's voice came out rougher than he intended. Tell me about Drummond. She turned back, a long pause measuring. What do you want to know? Everything, she told him. Standing in her own clinic with her arms folded across her chest, she laid out the architecture of Silas Drummond's control over Harrow's Bend with the precision of a woman who had spent 2 years studying the enemy. The land acquisitions, the bank maneuvers, the manufactured debt that caught struggling ranchers the way a trap catches rabbits. The pet physician Fenwick, who served as Drummond's tool for eliminating anyone whose health Drummond wanted, deteriorated. The sheriff who looked the other way. The carefully cultivated image of a benevolent civic leader who was in truth building himself a private kingdom in the Texas Hill Country. Why, Caleb asked. Why here? Why this particular valley? Something crossed her face, a hesitation as though she was deciding how much to say. I've been trying to piece that together. What I know is that he came from St. Louis with money that moved faster than his reputation could follow. Whatever he was doing there, whatever he was running from, she paused. He needed somewhere he could control completely, somewhere far from whatever he left behind. This valley with the right water access is valuable enough to build something real on. Legitimize himself, cover his tracks. You've done your research. I've had motivation. Her voice was flat. He's tried to destroy my practice 4 times in 2 years. The latest was last month. He had Fenwick report me to the county medical board for practicing without proper credentials. The board cleared me completely, but the investigation cost me 3 weeks and most of my savings. She met his eyes steadily. I'm still here. I can see that. I intend to keep being here. She tilted her head slightly. What about you, Mr. Holt? Are you planning to sell the ranch? No, that's easy to say in the first hour. I've been saying it since I got your mother's telegram, Caleb replied. Or Amos's telegram. I've been saying it for 5 days and 500 miles. The answer is no. She studied him with those gray eyes. Your mother said you were stubborn. She would know. She also said you had a tendency to carry guilt until it crippled you. A pause. I'm saying that as a physician, not as a critic. I'll keep it in mind. He picked up the envelope from the table. I'll read this at the ranch, and Dr. Calloway. He stopped himself. The lantern. My mother left it for a reason. Something about it I should know. Something shifted in her expression, subtle and careful. Read the letter first, she said, then come back and we'll talk. He read the letter on the ranch house porch as the sun went down. His mother's voice came off the page so clearly it was painful. Her rhythms, her cadences, the way she circled around difficult things before landing on them directly. She wrote about the ranch and the drought and the trouble with Drummond, but she also wrote about smaller things, the way the creek sounded after a good rain, the garden she'd been too sick to plant this spring, a mockingbird that had built a nest in the cottonwood nearest the house and sang every morning before dawn. She wrote about Caleb. I know why you left, son. I have always known. Your father was a hard man, and his hardness did damage that I could not undo, no matter how hard I tried. You needed to run, and you ran, and I do not blame you for a single mile of it. But I hope you know that wherever you were, whatever you were doing, I was proud of you. Not because of what you accomplished, though I believe you accomplished more good than you give yourself credit for, but because you survived. You kept going. That is not nothing. The ranch is yours now. The debts are yours, which I am sorry for. Silas Drummond holds the note, and he will come for the property. He has been trying to get it since the day he arrived in this valley, and my death will give him an opportunity he will not hesitate to use. Do not let him have it, Caleb. Not because of the land or the money, but because this valley needs someone willing to stand against him, and there is no one else. I have watched this town shrink into itself for 4 years, watched good people be frightened into silence one by one. They need to see that it can be done, that one person standing their ground can give others the courage to stand theirs. There is a woman in this town named Vivian Calloway. She is a physician of extraordinary skill and a person of extraordinary character, and she has been fighting Drummond alone for 2 years. She saved my life more times than I can count, and she is the reason I had 2 good years when I might have had none. She does not ask for help. She will not. She is too proud and too used to being refused. Help her anyway. And Caleb, let her help you. I know that is harder. I know you have spent your whole adult life making sure you don't need anyone. I know the reasons for that, and I understand them, and I am telling you they are wrong. You were made to love people and to be loved in return. Your father tried to beat that out of you, and he didn't succeed. Don't let him succeed now from beyond the grave by making you finish the job for him. There is one more thing. Look inside the lantern. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you past every horizon I can see from here. Mama Caleb sat for a long time with the letter in his hands, and the Texas dark settling around him, and the creek making its quiet sound in the cottonwoods below. The mockingbird his mother had written about sang 3 short phrases and went silent. He reached for the lantern. It was heavier than it looked. He turned it in his hand, slowly running his fingers over the etched roses, remembering the hundreds of times he had seen it sitting in the window morning light, coming through it and catching the silver. A small door in the base, which he had always assumed was for candle access. He opened it. Inside, rolled tight and tied with a piece of faded ribbon, was a piece of paper. He unrolled it carefully. The handwriting was different from his mother's, older, more formal, legal in its structure. He read it twice, understanding more on the second reading than the first. Read it a third time to be sure. Then he sat very still in the dark with the paper in his hands and the stone in his chest that was always there, always heavy, and felt for the first time in years something shift. Nora Whitfield arrived at the ranch before breakfast the next morning with a basket covered in a checkered cloth and the brisk energy of a woman who had decided to be helpful and was going to be helpful whether you wanted it or not. "You're skinnier than your mother described," she announced, setting the basket on the kitchen table without waiting to be invited. "Sit down and eat something. I brought biscuits and bacon and a jar of sour cherry preserves from my own pantry, which I do not offer to just anyone, so consider yourself honored." Caleb sat. He was in fact hungry. He'd barely eaten on the ride down, and last night he'd forgotten to see about food entirely. "You're Nora Whitfield," he said. "I am, and your mother was one of my dearest friends for 30 years, and I cried for 3 days after she passed, and I am not ashamed of it." She sat across from him with the directness of a woman who had long since run out of patience for social formalities. "Now, what are you going to do about Silas Drummond? You don't waste time." "I'm 62 years old. Time is the one thing I cannot afford to waste." She poured coffee from the pot Caleb had already made, the one domestic skill he'd maintained across 11 years of drifting, and settled her hands around the cup. "The whole town knows you're back. Half of them are frightened they've seen what Drummond does to people who cause him trouble. The other half are watching to see if you'll actually fight or if you'll run again." The word landed with precision. Caleb didn't flinch from it. "I'm not running." "Your mother believed that. I'm inclined to believe it too, but belief doesn't pay debts." She leaned forward slightly. $800 by September. Drummond holds the note. He'll call it early if he can find grounds the man is too smart to wait for a deadline he doesn't control. "I found something last night." Caleb told her about the paper in the lantern, the clause his mother had hidden there, the specific carve-out written in legal language that even a non-lawyer could understand. Nora's expression, which had been carefully neutral, changed. "You read it," she said, 3 times. She was quiet for a moment. "Then I witnessed the signing of that document." Did you know that Caleb had not known that? He set down his coffee cup. "Tell me." 2 years ago, November, early winter, one of those cold spells that comes before the real cold. Drummond came out here with his lawyer to discuss the loan. Your mother had already decided to borrow the money. She didn't have much choice. The previous summer had been brutal. But she was reading every word of that contract herself before she signed, which Drummond's lawyer did not appreciate. A ghost of a smile crossed Nora's face. Your mother read every single word. She asked questions, good questions. And then she said she wanted to add a clause. The water rights exclusion. Drummond's lawyer pushed back, said it was unusual. Drummond himself said it was unnecessary, that the clause was redundant because, of course, the water rights were part of the property. Your mother said she was sure he was right, but she would feel better with it in writing. Nora's smile sharpened slightly. She looked confused about it. Confused and a little apologetic, like a woman who didn't quite understand what she was asking for. She was not confused. She understood exactly what she was doing. Caleb looked at the lantern sitting on the table where he'd left it the night before. His mother had hidden that document for 11 years against a day she hoped would never come, and prepared for carefully anyway. She was protecting the one thing he couldn't afford not to have, Caleb said. She was protecting you. Specifically, she was protecting whatever chance you'd have if you came back. The land could be forfeit, she understood that was possible. But without the water rights, the land is worth half what Drummond needs it to be worth for his railroad ambitions. She took away his winning card and hid it in plain sight. Does Drummond know about the clause? He signed the contract, whether he read it as carefully as your mother did. She spread her hands. His lawyer may have missed it. It's buried in the third page between two paragraphs of standard land language. Easy to skim past. She paused. Or he knows and believes you'll never find it. Either way, the moment he does know you have it, he'll move fast. He won't be able to afford patience. Then I need to move faster. Caleb poured more coffee, thinking. Vivian Calloway, how much does she know about Drummond's finances? His actual operations? More than anyone else in this valley, she has a gift for getting people to talk patience, trust her with things they wouldn't tell a priest. She's been piecing together a picture of Drummond for 2 years. What he owns, what he owes, where the money actually comes from. Nora set down her cup. Why? Because a water rights clause changes my bargaining position, but it doesn't win the fight. Drummond has a lawyer money and a sheriff. I have a piece of paper and $43. He looked at Nora steadily. I need allies. Real ones, not just people who wish me well from a safe distance. Nora was quiet for a moment. The railroad investors, she said slowly. You know about them? Not yet. Tell me. There's a group from back east, investors building a line through the hill country. Drummond has been courting them for 2 years. He needs your mother's water access to complete the deal. Without it, the locomotive operations for this stretch of the line become economically impossible. It's not just valuable, it's the linchpin of everything he's building. She met Caleb's eyes. If someone else could offer those investors the same access on better terms, without the complications of dealing with a man who is, she paused, choosing her word carefully, who is not entirely what he presents himself to be. Where are these investors now? Staying at the Garrison House. They've been here a week reviewing Drummond's proposals. A man named Aldridge is their representative, the one who actually talks to people. His superior, a man named Carver, makes the final decisions but doesn't leave his room much. She tilted her head. Nora, I should say, I know Marcus Aldridge slightly. He came into the clinic last month with a sprained wrist. We had a conversation. What kind of conversation? The kind where I mentioned that the information Drummond had provided them about water access might not be entirely accurate. Nora's expression was carefully innocent. And he mentioned that discrepancies in a business proposal of this scale would be quite serious, and he would certainly want to be informed of any relevant facts before commitments were finalized. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Did my mother know you were doing that? Your mother and I had an understanding, Nora said primly. We had been having an understanding for 30 years. It was a very efficient arrangement. He went to the clinic that afternoon. The morning had been busy. Caleb had spent it walking every fence line on the property, cataloging damage and making lists he couldn't yet afford to act on. The work had been good for him. Physical problems had physical solutions, which was a refreshing change from the other kind. By the time he rode into town, the sun was past its peak, and the main street of Harrow's Bend had settled into the slower rhythm of late afternoon. He found Vivian treating a child with a badly infected hand, a boy of about 10, who was trying very hard not to cry and mostly succeeding. Caleb waited by the door without being asked, watching her work. She cleaned the wound with carbolic solution, applied a poultice, and bandaged the hand with the economy of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She explained each step as she went, not to the worried mother standing nearby, but to the boy himself what she was doing, and why, what the infection was, and how the body fought it, what he needed to watch for over the next few days. When they'd gone, she turned to Caleb. You read the letter, she said, and found the lantern. He pulled the rolled paper from his pocket. I'd like to know how much of what's written here my mother explained to you. Vivian's expression shifted, something careful in it, something that had been waiting. Sit down, she said. He sat. She sat across from him, and for the next hour she talked. She told him about the conversation she'd had with his mother 6 months before Dottie Holt died, lying in bed, already too weak to get up, still sharp enough to lay out a legal strategy with the precision of a trained attorney. She told him about the clause, about why his mother had fought for it, about her conviction that Drummond would eventually overreach himself, and that when he did, someone would need to be holding a card he hadn't anticipated. She was planning for you, Caleb said. She was planning for the possibility of you, Vivian said carefully. She didn't know if you'd come back. She hoped, but she made the plan work regardless, just in case. A pause. There's a version of this story where no one comes home, and I'm the one sitting in a lawyer's office arguing water rights in probate court. Your mother covered that scenario too, for the record. Caleb looked at her. She left you something as well. It wasn't a question. A slight color came into Vivian's face. That's between her and me. Fair enough. He rolled the paper back up carefully. Tell me about Marcus Aldridge. Her eyes sharpened with interest. Nora told you. She suggested there might be an opening. There might be? Vivian leaned back in her chair and folded her arms, a gesture he was coming to recognize as her thinking posture. Aldridge is not unintelligent, and he's not in Drummond's pocket the way the local men are. He's here representing investors who have a great deal of money at stake and will not be pleased to discover they've been operating on incomplete information. She paused. What Drummond told them about the water access is not technically a lie. He controls most of the creek access in the valley. He simply failed to mention that the most critical section, your family's stretch, carries a legal encumbrance he cannot override. The clause my mother buried. Exactly. If Aldridge knew about it, knew what it actually meant for the operational viability of Drummond's deal, he'd want a conversation with me. I think he'd want it very urgently. Her gray eyes met his steadily. The question is how to get to him before Drummond realizes what you're doing. Once Drummond knows you have that document, he'll start moving. Fast. He's not a patient man when he feels threatened. Caleb thought about what Nora had told him about Drummond's origins in St. Louis, the money that moved faster than reputation, the need for a place where he could reinvent himself. A man who was hiding something had more to lose than a man who was just greedy. That made him more dangerous, but it also made him more vulnerable. I need to understand what he's running from, Caleb said. I have some thoughts about that. Vivian stood and moved to the back of the clinic to a shelf he hadn't noticed before, lower than the medical supplies, mostly hidden behind a standing cabinet. She withdrew a wooden box, brought it to the table, and opened it. Inside were papers, a great many of them, notes, newspaper clippings, letters, what appeared to be handwritten records of conversations. 2 years' worth of careful, methodical intelligence gathering. My patients, Vivian said, come from everywhere. Drummond Town people who work for Drummond, people who used to work for Drummond, people Drummond has harmed. They don't always know what they're telling me, but I listen carefully and I write things down. She spread her hands over the papers. I know more about Silas Drummond than he would be comfortable with. Caleb looked at the box. Then he looked at her, this woman who had come from Philadelphia to treat the sick in a Texas frontier town and had ended up building a careful private war against a man who wanted her gone. You've been doing this alone, he said. I don't have another option. I arrived in this town knowing no one. Drummond started his campaign against me inside the first month. Anyone who might have been an ally was either afraid or already in his debt. She closed the box. I've been managing. You've been surviving. Something flickered in her expression, a quick, involuntary acknowledgement that yes, there was a difference, and she knew it. My mother said you don't ask for help. Caleb kept his voice neutral, matter of fact. She also said you remind her of me. I'm choosing to take that as a good sign and not a warning. It might be both. Maybe. He met her eyes. I'm not good at this either. Being, accepting, all of it. He paused. But I'm told I need to learn. And I think you might need, don't. Her voice was quiet but firm. Don't tell me what I need, Mr. Holt. I've had enough of men deciding what I need. Fair enough. He pushed back from the table. What if I told you what I need and let you decide whether it matches anything you're already working on? She considered him. A long, measuring silence. The mockingbird outside it had followed him to town, apparently, or there were many mockingbirds in Harrow's Bend, sang a brief, complicated phrase. What do you need? She asked finally. I need someone who knows this town and this enemy better than I do. I need someone who can back up the water rights claim with medical and legal testimony about what Drummond's operations have actually cost this community. I need someone Aldridge will believe because he won't have any reason to trust me. He paused. And I need that someone to understand that I'm not going to run when it gets hard. I've done my running. No, the silence stretched. Viviana Calloway looked at him with those gray eyes that saw everything and gave very little away. Outside, a wagon rattled past on the main street. The mockingbird sang again. There's a family on the east edge of town, she said finally. The Pierces. Their youngest girl has been coughing for a week. I need to go out there this afternoon. She stood. You could drive. The road's rough and it would help to have someone who knows horses. It was not an acceptance. It was not a partnership. It was a test, and Caleb understood that, and he stood and reached for his hat. I know horses, he said. I know you do. She gathered her bag with practiced efficiency. Don't make me regret this, Mr. Holt. Caleb. She paused at the door, her back to him, and for just a moment he thought he saw the set of her shoulders change something, releasing something small and tired and long-held. Don't make me regret it, Caleb, she said. And she walked out into the Texas afternoon, and he followed. And behind them, the silver lantern sat on the examination table with its hidden document and its decades of his mother's hope, catching the last of the day's light through the window glass, burning like a small, determined fire. The Pierce family lived at the end of a road that was more habit than path. Two-wheel ruts through scrub cedar and limestone winding east from town until the land opened into a small, flat valley where a modest cabin sat with chickens scratching in the yard and a kitchen garden that had given up on the drought. Caleb drove the clinic's wagon with the easy competence of someone who'd spent years moving through rough country. Vivian sat beside him with her medical bag on her lap and the wooden box of papers which she'd brought, he noted without explanation, wedged carefully behind the seat. She didn't speak much on the drive, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of a person who was thinking and thinking seriously. The Pierce girl, Caleb said. How old? 7. Her name is Clara. Vivian was watching the scrub cedar move past. Her mother brought her in last week, said she'd had a cough for 10 days. The family had been to Fenwick. First he told them it was summer dust and sold them a tonic for 60 cents. Her voice was flat. The tonic is sugar water and a small amount of alcohol. And Clara has the early signs of whooping cough. She needs specific care, quiet, and clean air. What she doesn't need is alcohol-based tonic and the anxiety of parents who were told nothing serious is wrong when something very serious is wrong. She glanced at him. Fenwick knows the difference. He's not an incompetent. He's a tool. They found the Pierces in a state of quiet, grinding fear, the kind that comes from watching a child get worse while being told by authority figures that everything is fine. Tom Pierce, a lean, weathered man in his 40s, met them at the wagon with the controlled desperation of someone who has been holding himself together through sheer effort of will. She's worse, he said. Last night was bad. The coughing spells. He stopped jaw working. I'm here, Vivian said, climbing down from the wagon. Show me. Caleb stayed with the horses initially, then followed when it became clear they might need help. The cabin's interior was dim and stuffy. He went to work on that first opening windows and propping the door, creating airflow without drafts, while Vivian examined the child. Clara was small and frightened with the telltale high-pitched whoop at the end of her coughing spells that told a trained ear everything it needed to know. What Caleb saw in that cabin was the same thing he'd seen in Vivian's clinic, a kind of care that was completely integrated, no gap between technical competence and human compassion. She spoke to Clara as though Clara were a participant in her own treatment rather than a passive recipient. She explained the illness in terms a child could hold. Your body is fighting and it's making a lot of noise while it fights, and that's frightening. But noise isn't the same as losing. Clara, who had been rigid with fear, softened a degree. Not all the way. She was too sick and too young and too frightened for that, but enough. She needs to be elevated when sleeping, Vivian told the Pierces afterward, her voice calm and specific. Pillows arranged like this. The coughing spells will get worse before they ease, that's normal, and the worsening is not a crisis unless she stops breathing between spells, which she won't. I'll come back in 2 days. Do not give her any more of Fenwick's tonic. He said it would I know what he said. She was gentle, but absolute. Trust me on this. Outside, hitching the team back up while Vivian made her final notes, Tom Pierce came and stood at Caleb's elbow. "You're Dottie Holt's boy," he said. "I am. I was sorry to hear about her passing. She was a good neighbor, better than we deserve sometimes." He was quiet for a moment. "You stay in Arusu?" "Yes." "Good." He said it simply without flourish. "This town needs people who'll stand up. We've been scared. Too scared, if I'm honest. A man like Drummond, the way he moves, the way he gets his hooks into everything." He stopped, shook his head. "I'm not brave. I've got a sick daughter and a wife and a ranch that's just barely keeping us alive. I can't afford to be brave." Caleb understood that. He had never been in a position to condemn it. Nobody's asking you to be. But somebody should be. Somebody ought to be. Tom looked at him. "Your mother was brave. Quietest kind of brave I ever saw. She just kept refusing every time Drummond came around, just kept saying no, like it was the simplest word in the world." "She hid something from me," Caleb said. "Something that might change things." Tom nodded slowly, not asking what it was. "Then I hope you use it." On the drive back, the sun was dropping, and the scrub cedar threw long shadows across the road. Vivian sat with her notes in her lap, a pen moving quickly across paper. "You're good with people," she said, not looking up. "I was a lawman for a while. It teaches you." "What kind?" "Town marshal in Wichita for 2 years. Deputy before that." He kept his eyes on the road. Then Dodge City, then a bad winter and a worse decision, and then nothing in particular for the last 4 years. She set her pen down. "What happened in Dodge City?" He'd known she'd ask. He found he didn't dread it the way he usually did with most people. The telling felt like handing over something they'd use against you. With Vivian Calloway, he had a peculiar sense that she was asking because she wanted to understand, not because she was collecting information. He told her about the robbery. 3 men experienced, desperate, well-armed. He'd tracked them to a farmhouse 6 miles from town and made the approach at dawn, standard procedure, every step of it by the book. 2 men came out with guns. He fired. The third came out shooting from a window. Caleb took a round in the shoulder, got behind the water trough, fired back by reflex. "The third man went down," he said. "When I got to him, I saw he was young, 16, 17 maybe. I found out later his name was Danny Coles. His father had been riding with the other two since the previous winter and had brought the boy along on this job. Danny Coles didn't want to be there. He'd been crying in the farmhouse. Apparently the farmer's wife, who'd been held there, told me afterward." Vivian said nothing. She had turned to face him on the wagon seat, watching him with careful attention. "He was 16 and he came out of that window with a gun in his hand, and he shot me," Caleb said. "And I shot him back because that's what you do, and there was no alternative. And he died right there in the farmyard with hay in his hair, and it doesn't matter that there were no alternative. It still happened. He's still dead. You turned in your badge. The next morning. Couldn't wear it anymore. Couldn't keep being the man who enforced things." He paused. "I know what I did was legal. I know it was necessary by every standard that applies. I also know a boy is dead because of a decision I made in a quarter second, and I've never once stopped knowing it." "No," Vivian said quietly. "I imagine you haven't." He glanced at her. Her expression wasn't pity. He couldn't have borne pity. It was something more precise than that. Recognition, maybe. The look of a person who also knew what it was to carry something that could not be put down. "You lost someone," he said. "That's not—" He stopped. "I shouldn't assume." "No, you should." She looked at the road ahead. "My father was a physician in Philadelphia. A good one, genuinely skilled, genuinely committed. He developed a theory about infection and wound treatment that his colleagues found eccentric. They had him censured by the medical board. Stripped his credentials. He appealed for 3 years and died appealing of a heart that gave out from the stress." She was quiet for a moment. "He was right, by the way. Everything he said about wound infection has since been proven correct. He simply had the misfortune of being right before the consensus was ready. And you came west." "I came west because in Philadelphia I was Dr. Calloway's disgraced daughter, and in Texas I could be Dr. Calloway the physician, and there are people who need care badly enough that they don't ask about your father's credentials." She smoothed her notes on her lap. "I didn't expect Drummond. I arrived planning to treat the sick and be left alone. And and instead I found that the sick were being actively made worse by a man with a financial interest in the community's dependency on him. Her voice was steady, but underneath it, there was something iron. I made the mistake of saying so publicly in my second month. It has been escalating ever since. They drove in silence for a while. The town appeared in the distance, its lights beginning to come on one by one as the evening settled in. The investors, Caleb said, Aldridge and Carver. When do you think we should approach them? Not yet. She'd been thinking about this clearly. Her answer came without hesitation. Drummond is watching everything right now. You've just arrived, you made your position clear at the cemetery, and he'll have people reporting your movements. If you approach the investors directly before we've established what you can actually offer them, it will look like a desperate bid, and Drummond will have time to discredit it. How long do we wait? Not long, but we need two things first. She held up a finger. One, documentation of what the water rights clause actually means for their investment. Not our word, but a proper legal analysis that they can hold and read and evaluate. There's a lawyer in Caldwell City named Fletcher who owes me a favor. I can write to him tonight. And second, corroboration for what I know about Drummond's background. She pulled the wooden box from behind the seat onto her lap. I have patterns and hearsay and patient confidences. What I don't have is a source outside this valley who can confirm where Drummond came from and what he left behind. She met his eyes. But I know someone who might. Who? An old patient of mine, James Howell. He came through Harrow's Bend about 18 months ago, passing through on his way from St. Louis to San Antonio. He was badly dehydrated. I treated him for 2 days. We talked. He mentioned Drummond without knowing I knew him. They'd apparently had business dealings in St. Louis. She was quiet for a moment. What he said about Drummond in passing, as if it were common knowledge in certain circles in St. Louis, I've been thinking about it ever since. What did he say? That Silas Drummond was associated with a land development scheme in St. Louis County that collapsed spectacularly in 1873, that investors lost significant sums, that there was an investigation that somehow never resulted in charges, which Mr. Howell attributed with some cynicism to the fact that Drummond had very good lawyers and a very reliable way of making inconvenient witnesses become unavailable. Caleb processed that. He ran. He ran and he rebuilt. That's the pattern of his life, I think. He's done it before, and he'll do it again if we give him the chance. She looked at Caleb. But if we can get documentation of the St. Louis scheme to the investors' evidence that this man has done exactly this before taking money from trusting partners and disappeared, they'd run from him. They'd run from him and potentially cooperate with whatever follows from that. She paused. Howell gave me an address in San Antonio. I've been sitting on it for 18 months because I didn't have a co-plaintiff. Someone whose stake in this was significant enough that the investors would listen. You have one now. The wagon rolled into town. Caleb pulled up in front of the clinic and set the brake. For a moment, neither of them moved. This is going to be dangerous, Vivian said. When Drummond realizes what we're doing, he'll move against us. He's done it before, and he'll be less restrained this time because the stakes are higher. I know. Are you I said I know, and he turned to face her. The lamp above the clinic door had been lit by someone while they were out. Its light fell across her face, picking out the auburn in her hair and the precise steadiness of her gray eyes. I told you I'm done running. That's not something I say lightly. I have a history of saying things lightly and then finding reasons why the moment I actually have to mean them is different from other moments. He paused. This is different, for reasons I don't entirely have words for yet. She looked at him for a long moment. Your mother said you'd come back when you were ready. She was more optimistic than she had reason to be. She was a better judge of you than you are. Vivian climbed down from the wagon. Come inside. I need to write to Fletcher and to Howell tonight, and I'd like you to read what I'm sending before I send it. You may have context I don't. He followed her in. 3 days into his return, Caleb encountered Silas Drummond for the first time. He'd been expecting it. The encounter had the feel of inevitability about it, the way certain conversations did, but the timing was deliberate in a way that told him Drummond had been watching and had chosen his moment. Caleb had just left the bank where he'd confirmed the terms of his mother's debt with a teller who kept shooting nervous glances at a closed door at the back of the room. He was walking back toward the hitching post when Drummond fell into step beside him. "Mr. Holt?" The voice was well modulated, a transplant's careful accent that placed him somewhere Midwestern and expensive. "I've been hoping for an opportunity to speak." Caleb kept walking. "Here's your opportunity. I want to express my condolences about your mother. She was an admirable woman, stubborn as a fence post, but admirable." A slight pause that was probably supposed to read as warmth. "We didn't always agree on matters of business, but I respected her." That's a lot of words for a man who was trying to take her land. "I was trying to offer her a fair price for property that was becoming difficult to maintain. There's a distinction." Drummond matched his pace without apparent effort, a tall man well-dressed with the contained energy of someone who was accustomed to controlling rooms. His face was broad and regular-featured, the kind of face that photographed well and telegraphed trustworthiness to people who weren't paying attention. His eyes, Caleb noted, were very light blue and very still. "I'd like to make you the same offer." "No, I haven't named a price." "Doesn't matter." Drummond was quiet for a step or two. When he spoke again, the warmth had become something more carefully calibrated. "You've been gone 11 years. You have debts on the property stock that needs rebuilding infrastructure and disrepair. You have—" He paused, letting the pause do work. "You have no connections in this valley. No allies, no goodwill, no foundation. What you have is a piece of land and a sentimental attachment to it." "And a legal claim," Caleb said. "Don't forget that." "Of course, a legal claim that is encumbered by a debt I hold due in September." Drummond stopped walking. When Caleb didn't stop with him, he called after, "I hold the note, Mr. Holt. That gives me certain options." Caleb stopped, turned. They faced each other on the main street of Harrow's Bend in the mid-morning sun, and Caleb thought, "This is the man who frightened my mother's neighbors into silence. This is the man who killed 3 people with medicine meant to harm them. This is the man who has been trying to destroy Vivian Calloway for 2 years because she would not be destroyed." "What kind of options?" Caleb said. "Technical ones, related to the condition of the collateral property. There are clauses in the contract that allow for acceleration of the debt in cases of, let's call it, diminished value." Drummond's light eyes held something beneath the pleasantry, a careful, precise threat. "A property where the barn was nearly burned, for example, where infrastructure damage has occurred. Your men caused that damage. Allegations require proof." The almost smile again. "I'd hate for this to become contentious. Your mother was a reasonable woman. I'd like to believe her son is the same." "My mother," Caleb said, "was smarter than you." He turned back toward the hitching post. "Have a good morning, Drummond." He heard the exhale, not quite a sigh, but a controlled release that told him more than any word. Drummond was not accustomed to being dismissed. He would move faster now and move harder, and that was precisely what Caleb needed him to do. That evening, Nora Whitfield showed up at the ranch again, this time without food but with urgency in her face. "Town meeting," she said without preamble. "Drummond called it for Thursday. He's announcing the railroad deal, making it official, putting his name on it publicly, making himself look like the hero of the valley. Once that announcement happens, every fence-sitter in Harrow's Bend tips his direction." She looked at Caleb. "You need to be there." "I plan to be. Not just there, present, visible." She folded her hands in the particular way she had when delivering instructions she expected to be followed. "People in this town remember your family. They remember your grandfather who built the first mill on this creek, your mother who sat with them when they were sick and lent them money when they were broke. The Holt name still means something if someone reminds them of it." She paused. "You've been spending your time at the clinic." "Working with Vivian, yes. People have noticed. Half the town has noticed, and half of what they've noticed is about the 2 of you personally, which is none of my business." "Nothing to notice," Caleb said, which was technically true and also technically not the whole story, and he suspected Nora knew it. "As I said, none of my business. What is my business is that you being seen with Vivian Calloway sends a message. It says that the 2 main obstacles to Drummond's plans are working together. It says that you, the returning Holt, are allied with the woman Drummond has been trying to eliminate. That's a statement without a single word being spoken. She gave him a sharp look. Make that statement before Thursday. Wow. The next day brought trouble before breakfast. Caleb was at the clinic helping Vivian reorganize the pharmaceutical stores, a task that had turned into a 3-hour inventory when it became clear that someone had been going through the supplies, probably looking for something incriminating or simply disrupting as a message when the door opened and a young woman came in. She couldn't have been more than 20. Dark hair, pale face, a shawl held closed over her dress in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. She stood in the doorway for a moment, checking who was present, the specific wariness of an animal that has been hurt often enough to check every room before entering. Molly, Vivian said immediately, her voice dropping into the particular register of careful calm. Come in. Close the door. The young woman came in. When she turned to close the door behind her, Caleb saw the bruising along her jaw. She was holding herself the way people do when their ribs hurt, a slight forward curve, shallow breathing. Why don't you sit down, Vivian said. Caleb, would you mind giving us a few minutes? He stepped outside. He sat on the bench in front of the clinic and looked at the main street of Harrow's Bend, going about its morning business, and thought about the bruising along that young woman's jaw and the way she had checked the room before entering. 20 minutes later, Vivian came out. She sat beside him on the bench, her hands in her lap, her expression, the neutral, professional face that he was learning, meant she was managing something difficult. Her husband, Caleb said, Elias Creed. He works for Drummond, handles certain matters that require someone without particular scruple. She was quiet. This has been happening since before I arrived in Harrow's Bend. I've treated her 4 times. She hasn't left because she has nowhere to go. No family in the territory, no money of her own, and a husband who has reminded her on multiple occasions that leaving would be, she stopped, inadvisable. Drummond knows about it. Drummond relies on Creed. He's not going to discipline a useful employee for what he'd consider a private domestic matter. Her voice was absolutely flat. It is not a private domestic matter, but I have no legal standing to intervene without her consent, and she won't give it. She's terrified. She came in for treatment. She comes in when she can't function otherwise. Vivian looked at her hands. It's one of the things I can't fix. She won't let me fix it, and I can't force her. I can treat the injuries and document them, and wait and hope she reaches a point where she chooses differently. She paused, and I can hold the documentation if it becomes relevant. Caleb understood what she was saying without saying if it ever comes to a trial. If Drummond's people ever face judgment for their crimes, Molly Creed's documented injuries are evidence of what kind of operation Drummond ran. You've been building a case, he said, for 2 years. She looked up at him. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to use it. I didn't know if anyone would ever be in a position to help me use it. A pause. I'm starting to think I might have been wrong about that. The morning light was sharp and clean, the kind that comes after a night when the air actually cooled. Caleb sat beside her on that bench and felt the shape of what was being built between them. Not romance, not yet something more foundational than that. The kind of partnership that forms between people who have both been working a very long time in isolation and have stopped expecting anyone to appear and simply decide to help. Your father's journals, Caleb said, the ones you brought from Philadelphia, his research. She turned to look at him. How did you know about those? Nora mentioned them once, said they were the thing you treasured most. That if Drummond ever managed to destroy them, he paused. She said it would break something in you that couldn't be mended. Vivian was quiet for a moment. They're the record of his life's work. 20 years of careful documentation, case studies, surgical records, theoretical notes. If his methods are ever formally accepted, when they're accepted, those journals will be the proof that he got there first. She looked at the street. I carry copies of the most essential documents, but the originals I keep them in the clinic. That's not safe enough. I know. She hesitated. But I don't have anywhere else. The ranch, Caleb said. Amos knows where every hollow wall and buried strongbox is on that property. My mother hid important things in important places for decades. The journals would be safe there. She looked at him. The gray eyes did the thing they did, the rapid, careful assessment. You'd trust me with access to your home. We're already trusting each other with everything else. He shrugged. Seems redundant to draw a line at a place to store books. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. Your mother said you were inflexible. My mother was inflexible. I learned it from her. She meant it as a compliment. The smile faded, but something warm remained at the corners of her eyes. I'll bring them tonight if that's agreeable. Amos will have coffee on. Well, the letters went out that afternoon, one to Fletcher the lawyer in Caldwell City, one to James Howell in San Antonio. Vivian wrote them while Caleb read through her bottle of documentation, organizing it, noting gaps, asking questions she answered without hesitation. It was detailed work, methodical work, the kind of work that didn't leave room for the particular anxiety of waiting. Caleb had always done better with his hands occupied. He suspected Vivian was the same way. Around mid-afternoon, she said without looking up from her writing, "Why did you leave Harrow's Bend? The real reason, not the version you tell strangers." He considered the question. My father, he said finally. Nora told me he was difficult. He was cruel. He said it plainly without the apology he might have offered for it a few years ago. Quietly, specifically cruel in the way that some men are who've decided the world owes them something it never paid up on. My mother absorbed most of it. I did what I could to draw it away from her, but he stopped. There was a night, I was 22. He came home drunk, and he said something to my mother. I hit on him. He hit me back harder. We fought in the yard until we were both bleeding, and I picked up my hat and rode out and never came back. You left your mother with him. She'd asked me to go, said having me there made him worse, gave him a target. He looked at the wall. She was probably right. I told myself she was right. I've spent 11 years not being sure. Did he hurt her after you left? He died the following winter, fell from his horse in a flash flood, drunk. He was quiet. She had 15 good years after that. That's what Amos tells me. And you didn't come back for any of them. He turned to look at her. No. She held his gaze. I'm not judging you. I know, I'm judging myself. I've been doing that for 11 years. I'm trying to determine whether guilt serves any function at this point, or whether it's just something I'm doing instead of something more useful. It doesn't serve any function, Vivian said with the directness of a physician. What it is a habit. Some habits are hard to break even when you've intellectually understood they're not serving you. She returned to her writing. The useful thing would be to focus on what can actually be changed from here forward. He almost smiled. You're not going to be gentle about any of this, are you? I'm gentle about injuries. Psychological habits are another matter. She dipped her pen. You want someone to tell you that you're forgiven and that everything is all right. I can't give you that. But I can tell you that you came back and that matters. And that your mother knew you'd come back and she was right and she was glad. A pause, very brief. That's what she told me at the end. She said he'll come. And when he does, don't let him give up. The words settled into the room. So you're under instructions, Caleb said. I'm under instructions. She didn't look up. I don't usually follow instructions well, but your mother had a way of making requests that were very difficult to refuse. I know, he said. I know exactly what you mean. Thursday arrived with the weight of inevitability. The town meeting was in the square. The whole valley seemed to have turned out wagons from the furthest ranches, families who rarely came to town, everyone drawn by the combination of a Drummond announcement and the running whisper about Caleb Holt and what he'd come back for. Caleb arrived with Amos on one side and Vivian on the other, and the crowd that parted for them did so with a mixture of expressions that told him everything about the state of this town. Fear, sympathy, a cautious conditional hope. Drummond ascended the steps of the bandstand with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his life performing public confidence. He was well-dressed as always, a dark suit with a silver watch chain, his silver-streaked hair combed back from that broad, regular face. Behind him stood Sheriff Briggs, fat and careful, and Dr. Fenwick, thin and sycophantic, and three men in range clothes who were not there for the scenery. Friends, neighbors, Drummond began, and the voice was everything the face promised. Warm assured, carrying the kind of authority that came from never having doubted itself. I'm grateful you've all come today because what I have to tell you is the best news this valley has seen in 20 years. He paused for effect. He was good at pauses. The Texas Central Railroad has agreed to run a main line through Harrow's Bend. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a wave of sound voices, overlapping, some cheering, some questioning, many simply stunned. A railroad meant everything in a valley that had been struggling through drought and depressed cattle prices, commerce growth, connection to markets that had been too far away to matter. Drummond let it roll for a moment, then raised his hands. Construction is planned to begin this fall. The line will run through the valley, following Harrow's branch for obvious reasons of water access for the locomotives. Another pause, and now the performance had a sharper edge under it. The property agreements necessary for the route are nearly complete. One final acquisition remains. Caleb felt Vivian tense slightly beside him. The Holt Ranch? Drummond's eyes found Caleb, in the crowd he'd been watching for him had timed this precisely. The late Mrs. Holt's estate, now under the management of her son, who has generously returned to settle his mother's affairs. The warmth in the voice was perfectly calibrated to make the word generously sound like its opposite. I'm confident that Caleb Holt, knowing what his mother wanted for this valley, will make the right decision. The crowd turned, hundreds of eyes. Caleb stepped forward. He hadn't planned a speech. Speeches weren't his strength, but he climbed the steps of the bandstand because Drummond was up there, and the only response to a man who controlled elevation was to take it from him. Mr. Drummond is right that I've come back, Caleb said. He didn't project the way Drummond did, but the square was quiet enough that he didn't need to. He's wrong about why. I came back to bury my mother, and then I found out what this valley has been living with for 4 years, and I'm staying. He paused. The Holt Ranch is not for sale. The railroad is welcome to come through this valley, but the water access they need is mine, and any agreement about it gets made with me, not with a man who's been manufacturing debt to steal property from people who can't afford to fight him. Silence. The particular concentrated silence of a crowd recalculating. Drummond's smile had thinned considerably. That's quite a claim, Mr. Holt. Perhaps we should let the legal documents speak for themselves. That's exactly what I intend, Caleb said. Let the documents speak. He came down from the steps. He heard Drummond begin again behind him, smooth recovery, the voice of a man who had been managing audiences for decades, but he also heard something in the crowd that hadn't been there when the meeting started. Murmuring, the particular purposeful kind. Well, Nora Whitfield said quietly, appearing at his elbow. You didn't exactly win the square, but you didn't lose it either. What do you call it? A draw. She watched Drummond work the crowd above them, which is the best result we could reasonably hope for today. She looked at Caleb sideways. He'll come after you tonight. I know. Are you ready? Caleb looked at the square, at Drummond's performance above it, the people below, who were calculating, weighing, trying to determine where the advantage lay, where the safety was. At Vivian, standing a few feet away, watching Drummond with gray eyes that contained everything she knew about him. I'm not interested in ready, he said. Ready was 11 years ago. Now I'm just staying. Nora Whitfield nodded once. That'll do, she said. For today, that'll do. The sun was going down behind the hills and the lanterns were coming on in the square, and somewhere in the crowd a fiddler had started playing something the wrong kind of cheerful, and Harrow's Bend, Texas waited to see what kind of man Caleb Holt would turn out to be. He was still figuring that out himself. Drummond moved first. Caleb had been expecting it since the moment he stepped down from the bandstand, but the speed was still instructive. By the time the lanterns in the square were fully lit and the crowd had begun to disperse, Sheriff Briggs had found him. Mr. Holt. The sheriff was a fleshy man with careful eyes that were smarter than the rest of his face suggested. Got a few questions, if you don't mind. About what? Damage to the Drummond Land Company's property. A pause perfectly calibrated. Somebody cut a fence line on the North Ridge this week. Mr. Drummond's property. His foreman says they saw your foreman near there yesterday. Caleb looked at him steadily. Amos Greer has been on our land every day this week. What was cut, we're still assessing. Then come back when you've finished assessing. Caleb put on his hat. And bring something better than hearsay from a man Drummond pays. Briggs watched him go with the expression of a man storing something away. Not angry, patient. The patience of someone who has been told to wait and trust that the moment will come. Vivian was waiting at the edge of the square. I saw Briggs. Fishing expedition. Drummond needs grounds to move against the ranch, and he hasn't found them yet. Caleb fell into step beside her. No. He'll manufacture them if he has to. He's good at manufacturing things. She was quiet for a moment. Caleb, there's something I need to tell you something about my plan for Drummond. The part I haven't explained yet. He looked at her. Tell me. Not here. She glanced at the street around them, not paranoia, just careful. Come to the clinic. I need to show you something. The clinic after hours was different from the clinic during the day. Without patients, it felt smaller, more personal, the space of a person's private work rather than a public service. Vivian lit 2 lamps and settled at her table and opened the wooden box. I've been thinking about this for 2 years, she said. How to actually end Drummond. Not slow him down, not complicate his plans, end him. Make him stop. She looked at Caleb. Documents help. Legal proceedings help. Public knowledge helps. But the investors are the key. If the investors withdraw, he loses the railroad deal, which is the foundation of everything he's been building here. Without it, the land he's acquired isn't worth what he's borrowed against it. Without it, the entire scheme, and I believe it is a scheme deliberately constructed to be liquidated at the right moment, collapses. And the investors won't withdraw unless they know he's been lying to them. Or unless they know he's done this before. She pulled a paper from the box. The St. Louis situation. I've been going back and forth about whether to approach Aldridge directly, but there's a problem. He doesn't know us. Worse, he knows Drummond. They've had months of meetings, proposals, social engagements. Drummond is charming and he's had time to build trust. We're strangers with allegations. She set the paper down. I need something more concrete than what I have. I need Drummond to discredit himself, to do something that Aldridge witnesses or can't reasonably deny. Caleb leaned back. You're thinking about a trap. I'm thinking about creating a circumstance where Drummond behaves like Drummond. She met his eyes. He has a weakness. Every man like him has a weakness, and his is that he believes he's the most intelligent person in any room he enters. He's not wrong usually, but it makes him underestimate people he's decided to write off. He's written off both of us. He's written off me completely. I'm a woman who should have left 2 years ago and hasn't, and he's genuinely puzzled by my stubbornness because he can't understand motivation that isn't financial. She paused. He thinks you're a sentimental drifter who'll break when the pressure gets real. He's already planning for your failure. Let him. That's exactly what I'm proposing. She was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts with visible precision. There's a social occasion coming up, the Founders' Day dinner at the Garrison House 3 weeks from now. Drummond hosts it every year. He'll invite Aldridge and Carver. He'll make it a victory celebration, present the railroad deal as finished. Make it seem like the Holt matter is resolved. Is he inviting me? He'll have to. Excluding you publicly would look like fear. He'll invite you with the expectation that you'll either decline, which would serve his narrative, or attend and behave in some way he can use against you. She met his eyes. But if you attend, and if I attend, and if we've spent the next 3 weeks giving Aldridge information very carefully, not making accusations, just providing facts and letting him draw conclusions, then by the night of the dinner, Aldridge already has doubts. And Drummond, thinking he's won, will be less careful. She paused. He's going to be especially incautious at that dinner. He drinks more than he should when he's celebrating, and when he drinks, he sometimes says things. You're going to get him to talk. She looked at him steadily. I need you to distract him. Keep him occupied in conversation, make him feel like he's winning, and I'll find a private moment with Drummond where he thinks he can afford to be honest with me. Her jaw set. He's been wanting to be honest with me for 2 years. He enjoys the idea that he's beaten me. If he thinks the evening is going his way and there are no consequences, he'll tell you how clever he's been. He'll tell me exactly what he's done, and I'll document every word of it. Caleb studied her. The plan was elegant and it was dangerous, and she'd been carrying it alone for 2 years, waiting for the right pieces to be in place. What are you going to give him in exchange for candor? He asked. The appearance of defeat. She was matter of fact. I'm going to appear to concede. Tell him I've decided to close the clinic, that the fight isn't worth it, that I'll be leaving Harrow's Bend. She paused. It will be the most difficult performance of my life, but if he believes it, he'll lower his guard. And if something goes wrong, then we're no worse off than we are now. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking you to be comfortable with risk, Caleb. I'm asking you to calculate it the way I have. He calculated it. The plan had the particular quality of a chess move. It required pieces to be in certain positions before it could work. It required patience, and it required both of them to play roles with conviction. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks to get Aldridge the information he needs without Drummond seeing what we're doing. 3 weeks to make contact with Howell in San Antonio and get his testimony in writing. 3 weeks to receive Fletcher's legal analysis. She folded her hands on the table. And 3 weeks to keep the ranch intact while Drummond does whatever he's going to do next. He burned Molly Creed's husbands. He stopped. Wait, is Creed the man who, yes. Her voice was flat. Elias Creed is Drummond's primary instrument for direct action. Fence-cutting, property damage, intimidation visits. She paused. He's done worse. I believe he's responsible for a fire that destroyed Martin Kessler's barn 2 years ago. That was the event that convinced Kessler to sell. Caleb filed that. Then I need to make sure Amos doesn't go anywhere alone for a while. And I need to make sure the journals are safely at the ranch before anything else happens. She reached under the table and withdrew a leather case, worn old, the kind of case that had traveled a long way and contained things that mattered. I brought them tonight. He took the case. It was heavier than he expected. I'll take them out tomorrow morning. Thank you. She sat back, the energy that had been driving her through the explanations suddenly going quieter. It was a kind of exhaustion that was different from physical tiredness, the exhaustion of someone who has been holding something difficult for a very long time. I know, he said. He didn't try to fill it with something easier. She looked at him. Your mother was right about you, she said quietly. She was wrong about a lot of things when it came to me. She was right about this. She seemed to decide something. She said you'd been broken and put yourself back together wrong. That you were structurally sound, but there were gaps you'd filled with guilt instead of something better. A pause, Boise. She said it was fixable, that it was a better kind of wrong than most people manage. He sat with that for a moment. She really talked about me quite a lot. Every day for 6 months. The ghost of a smile. I know more about you than you know about me. It seemed fair to warn you. Is there something I should know about you? He asked. She considered the question with genuine seriousness. I'm impatient, she said. I don't apologize well. I form opinions quickly and revise them slowly. I have been told on more than one occasion that I argue like a man, which was meant as a compliment by the person saying it, and which I received as such, regardless of the intent. She paused. And I came west because I was running from something the same as you. I haven't entirely stopped running yet. I've just been running in place here, which is a different thing, but not entirely. What were you running from? The version of myself that my family had planned for. She looked at her hands. Philadelphia. A suitable marriage to a suitable man. A life of refined, comfortable purposelessness. She paused. My mother died when I was 14. My father gave me his medical books because there was nothing else left and he didn't know what to do with me. I read them. I read all of them. And then I read more, and then I went to a women's medical college in New York, and then I came here. She looked up. It is not a complicated story. It is a story about refusing an alternative. Your mother would have wanted the suitable marriage. My mother would have wanted whatever made me happy, but she died before she could tell me that. She shook her head slightly. I've spent 15 years making decisions as if she were watching and judging. My father's disgrace made it worse. I had something to prove for him. To him. She caught herself. I'm doing the thing you did earlier, the historical grievance recitation. I didn't mind. Still, she closed the wooden box. We should both get some sleep. Tomorrow I want to ride out to the Aldridge meeting. He's agreed to see me on a pretext about a health question one of the rail surveyors has been having. It's a legitimate enough reason that Drummond won't think twice about it. I'll drive you. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know. A pause. All right, she said. 7 in the morning. Bring coffee. He stood and gathered the leather case and his hat. At the door he paused. Vivian, at Devarshan. She looked up. Whatever this is between us. He stopped unorganized. I'm not going to pretend it's nothing. I also don't want to, he stopped again. I've spent 11 years with nothing worth staying for. I've spent 3 days here, and I already find myself calculating risk differently. He looked at her steadily. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just saying that so you know. She held his gaze. Something moved through her face, that rapid, careful assessment, but softened. I know, she said. I've known since the second day. He walked out into the Texas night, and the mockingbird sang 3 notes in the dark, and he thought about staying, and found for the first time in 11 years that the thought felt like arrival instead of trap. The reply from Marcus Aldridge came 2 weeks later, and it came not as a letter but as a knock on the clinic door. Caleb was there when he arrived. He had developed a habit of being at the clinic in the mornings, ostensibly helping with supply runs and patient transport, actually because the clinic was where Vivian was and the clinic was where the work was. And those two facts had become the same fact without him precisely deciding they should be. Aldridge was a compact man in his mid-40s with a precise dark beard and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent his career evaluating information and the people who delivered it. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Vivian. He came in and sat down without being invited, which Caleb decided to take as a positive sign. I've heard from San Antonio, Aldridge said. He placed a letter on the table between them. James Howell writes in considerable detail about the St. Louis situation. Mr. Drummond's involvement. The investors who lost money. The investigation that, he paused, that resolved itself in Mr. Drummond's favor in ways that Mr. Howell finds remarkable in retrospect. Vivian looked at the letter without touching it. And Fletcher's legal analysis. Arrived yesterday. Aldridge folded his hands. The water rights clause is valid and binding, which means that the representation made to my principals about the terms of the land acquisition was materially incomplete. He said it with the careful precision of a man choosing words that could later appear in a legal proceeding. My principals will want to know about this. When? Caleb asked. That's what I came to discuss. Aldridge glanced between them. The Founders' Day dinner is in 1 week. Mr. Drummond intends to present the partnership as finalized. If my principals are present at that dinner, and if Drummond makes representations that are inaccurate, Vivian said, then the situation becomes significantly clearer for everyone involved. Aldridge picked up the letter. I need you to understand what I'm agreeing to and what I'm not. I can ensure that Mr. Carver is informed before the dinner, informed carefully with documentation. I can ensure that any representations Drummond makes publicly are tested. He paused. What I cannot do is manufacture a confrontation. Whatever happens at that dinner has to happen organically. We understand, Vivian said. Aldridge looked at her. Dr. Calloway, I want to ask you something directly. You've been fighting this man for 2 years. You've stayed in a town that has been made hostile till you continued your practice under sustained pressure and built a documentation case that frankly is more thorough than anything I've seen from a professional investigator. He paused. Why? She met his gaze without hesitation. Because leaving would mean he won. And because this town has people in it who need a doctor. Both things are true. I'm not going to rank them for you. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. All right, he said. I'll be in touch before the dinner. He left. The clinic door closed behind him. Vivian sat very still for a moment. Then she looked at Caleb. 1 week. 1 week. He looked at the table where Aldridge's letter had lain. Are you ready to perform your concession? Not remotely. She stood. But I'll do it. She looked at him. Will you be convincing as the man who's given up? I'm a terrible liar. I know, which is why you are not going to lie. She met his eyes. You're going to be quiet and diminished and beaten, which is not lying. It's performing a future that doesn't happen. You're good at containing things. She paused. Use that. He thought about 11 years of containing grief and guilt and the particular loneliness of a man who has decided he doesn't deserve companionship. Yes, he said. I can do that. Good. She moved to her supply shelf and began her morning inventory with the efficiency of someone who was continuing, regardless of what happened. Now, I have a patient at 9 and I need someone to ride to the Pierce farm with a message about Clara's recovery. Would you... Already going, he said, and reached for his hat. She turned and looked at him, that swift, careful look. Then she turned back to her inventory. But there was something in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Something that looked from a certain angle like trust. The night before the Founders' Day dinner, Drummond's men hit the ranch. Caleb heard it first. Amos's old watchdog began barking at 2 in the morning. The deep, urgent bark that meant something was wrong, and not just a coyote. He was out the door with his boots half on and his rifle in his hand before he was fully awake, and what he saw when he came around the barn nearly stopped his heart. Fire. The barn's southeast corner was burning. Someone had packed dry brush against the foundation and lit it, while the structure was between Caleb and the house where he wouldn't see it from the bedroom window. He shouted for Amos and ran for the water trough, and for the next 40 minutes, both men worked with bucket and wet saddle blanket, while the horses screamed in their stalls and the fire tried to take what they'd spent the week repairing. They saved the barn, just Amos had a gash on his forehead. He'd gone down in the dark, hit the corner of the water trough, gotten up, and kept working without mentioning it. Caleb found him sitting on the fence afterward, pressing his hat against the cut blood running through his fingers. "You stubborn old man," Caleb said, reaching for a handkerchief. "I've been stubborn longer than you've been alive." Amos allowed Caleb to press the cloth against the wound. "4 of them. I saw them running when I came out, 4 men horses tied north of the property line." He looked at Caleb steadily. "Creed was one of them. I'd know that man's walk anywhere." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." They sat in the cooling dark, the smell of smoke hanging over the property, and Caleb thought about the Founders' Day dinner and what was going to happen there, and about whether 1 week was going to be enough. In the morning, he rode to the clinic and told Vivian. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Amos needs stitches. Bring him in." "That's your response?" "That's my first response. My second response is—" She stopped, composed herself with visible effort. "He's escalating because he knows the ground is shifting. He can feel it, which means what we're doing is working." She met his eyes. "And it means we need to finish this faster than we planned. The dinner is in 4 days." "I'm not waiting for the dinner." She reached for her wooden box. "I'm going to Aldridge today." "Drummond will see." "Drummond tried to burn down your barn last night. I am done managing Drummond's comfort level." Her voice had gone very quiet, which he was learning was the sign that she was most serious. "Aldridge needs to see Amos. He needs to see a man with stitches in his head who can describe 4 men on horseback with a lit torch. That's evidence. That's the kind of thing that moves cautious men." She was right. He knew she was right. "All right, go get Amos. And Caleb." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" "The barn's standing." "That's not what I asked." He stood in her clinic doorway in the early morning light and thought about fire and what it meant to almost lose the last thing his mother had trusted him with. "No," he said honestly, "but I will be." "Yes," she said with the particular certainty of a physician who has decided the prognosis. "You will." Aldridge took one look at Amos Greer's stitched forehead and his careful description of the 4 men and said, "I'll speak with Carver this afternoon." "Discreetly," Vivian said. "Of course," he looked at her. "Dr. Calloway, the dinner. Your plan, are you still—" "Drummond doesn't know what we've done. He thinks he's won." She straightened. "Let him think it for 4 more days, then we let him tell us exactly how he did it." Aldridge nodded slowly. "I want you to understand something. Even with Howell's testimony and Fletcher's analysis and this," he gestured at Amos, "criminal charges depend on the sheriff, who is Drummond's. Civil action will take months, possibly years. What we can actually do at the dinner in practical terms is destroy the railroad partnership. After that, what happens to Drummond depends on factors outside this room." "I understand," Vivian said. "The railroad partnership is the foundation of everything he's built here," Caleb said. "Without it, the debt structure collapses. He won't be able to hold what he's acquired. He'll have to liquidate or default." "Which may cause him to run," Aldridge acknowledged. "Which is all right," Vivian said with a precision that surprised Aldridge and didn't surprise Caleb at all. "If he runs, he leaves. If he leaves, the valley begins to recover. Justice would be preferable. But exit is acceptable." She looked at Aldridge. "What is not acceptable is letting him finish what he started." Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. I imagine it isn't. The 4 days before the Founders' Day dinner were the quietest Caleb could remember. Not peaceful quiet in the way that the air goes quiet before serious weather, that particular stillness that happens when everything is gathering itself for what comes next. He worked the ranch during the days and went to the clinic in the evenings, and each night lay in his mother's house listening to the creek and waiting for the sound of hoofbeats in the dark. They didn't come. Drummond had made his move on the barn and pulled back, which meant he was either satisfied he'd delivered sufficient warning or he was waiting for something. Caleb suspected the latter. Vivian had shifted into a mode he hadn't seen before, quieter than her usual, purposeful energy, more interior. She was preparing herself. He recognized it because he'd done something similar before difficult encounters back in the law days, the deliberate settling of oneself into position, the internal practice of the performance required. She would have to tell Silas Drummond that she was leaving Harrow's Bend, that she was giving up, that he had won. He tried once to ask her how she was holding up. I'm fine, she said in the tone that means I'm managing, and I need you to not ask about it. He let it go. He brought her coffee the next morning without making it into a moment, and she looked at the cup and then looked at him and said very quietly, "Thank you," and that was sufficient. 3 days before the dinner, Nora Whitfield appeared at the ranch with her basket and a face that said she'd been gathering information. Drummond has been making visits, she said, unpacking without waiting for an invitation. To every property holder in the valley personally, with his hat in his hand, being charming. He's telling people the railroad deal is settled and that anyone who wants in on the growth opportunity needs to commit now before the early investor positions are taken. She set down a jar of preserves with a slight click that communicated disapproval. 3 families have already agreed to terms I'm fairly sure they don't fully understand. He's consolidating before the dinner, Caleb said, creating facts on the ground. He's doing what he always does, moving while others are still deciding. She sat. Nora, Caleb, I need to tell you something, and it's not comfortable to say. She folded her hands on the table. I've been talking to people, quietly, asking where they stand, and the honest answer is that most of them are afraid and exhausted, and they would follow whoever seems most likely to win. She met his eyes steadily. If the dinner goes wrong, if Drummond emerges from it intact and credible, you'll lose the valley. Not the ranch specifically, but the goodwill, the possibility of building what your mother imagined. She paused. I'm not saying this to frighten you. I'm saying it because you should know exactly what you're fighting for. I know, Caleb said. And Vivian, she stopped. She knows what she's risking. If this performance of hers fails, if Drummond realizes what she's doing, there's no recovery. He'll have grounds to destroy what little practice she has left. Another pause. She's been protecting this valley's sick for 2 years. She's documented Drummond's crimes for 2 years. She's doing this for the town, but she's also doing it for herself. And she's doing it for you. I want you to understand that. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I understand it. Do you understand what you're going to do about it? I'm going to make sure she doesn't have to do any of it alone. He met Nora's sharp eyes. That's what I can promise. The rest depends on Drummond. Nora studied him, then she nodded once with the decisive quality of a woman who has made up her mind. Your mother said you'd come back a better man than you left. I was prepared to be skeptical. She stood and began unpacking the rest of the basket. I'm less skeptical. High praise. It's the highest I offer. She set a pot of honey on the table. Now eat something. You look like you've been forgetting. The morning of the Founders' Day dinner, Molly Creed appeared at the ranch. Caleb had been in the yard when he saw her coming down the track on foot, and the walk told him everything before she reached him, head up, shoulders back, the particular posture of someone who has decided something and is afraid of losing their nerve before they complete it. She'd been crying recently. Her jaw showed old bruising in the yellow-green stage of healing, and there was something new at the corner of her eye he didn't comment on. Elias is gone, she said, left last night with Drummond's other men. He doesn't know I know where. She looked at Caleb steadily. He went to the Aldridge Hotel to be available in case Mr. Drummond needs backup this evening. Caleb processed that. You're telling me Drummond is bringing muscle to the dinner. I'm telling you Elias is there. She looked down at her hands. I went to Dr. Calloway this morning. She was kind to me. She gave me something for the... She stopped. She told me I should come here, that I should talk to you. What do you want to tell me, Molly? I want to, she swallowed. I want to say what happened, all of it. I've been afraid for so long, and Elias is gone, and Dr. Calloway says she'll help me if I, she met his eyes. I want to say what I know about Elias, about what Drummond has had him do. The morning was very quiet. A meadowlark sang somewhere over the ridge. Come inside, Caleb said. Let me get you some water, and then you can tell me everything. She told him for 2 hours. When she finished, Caleb rode to the clinic. Vivian listened to a summary of Molly's testimony with the focused attention of someone filing every word. When he finished, she sat for a moment, and he saw something in her face that was fierce and sad in equal measure. She's been carrying that for 3 years, she said. She wants to testify. She said so. She wants to put it in writing. I'll help her do that. Today before the dinner. Vivian stood. This changes things, Caleb. Molly's testimony isn't just about Drummond's business practices. It's about criminal acts committed by his direct employee at his direction. If we get her statement to Aldridge before tonight, he'll have it when he needs it. He'll have something Drummond can't explain away as misunderstanding or business competition. She crossed the room and reached for her medical bag, the automatic gesture of a woman who prepared to move. Then she stopped herself. I need to do this carefully. Drummond can't know Molly has talked. If Creed finds out before tonight, he won't. I'll keep Amos at the rancho to watch the road. She can stay there until this is over. Vivian looked at him. He was struck, not for the first time, by the quality of her attention, the way she listened with her whole face, not just her ears. You're protecting her. She's a witness, and she made a choice that cost her something. He paused. People who make choices like that deserve to have them matter. Her expression changed, something soft moving through the precision. Your mother said you believed in people who tried even when they tried late. She looked away. She was right about that too. He wanted to say something. He stood in the middle of Vivian Calloway's clinic in the morning, before the most important evening either of them would likely ever have, and he thought about how strange it was that he had come back to this valley to bury his mother, and instead found himself standing at the edge of something that felt against all probability like beginning. Tonight, he said, tonight. She picked up her bag. Will you drive me to the Garrison house? I'll drive you. And Caleb. She turned. Whatever happens tonight, whatever Drummond says, whatever performance I have to put on, don't let it change what you think of me. I know what I'm doing, and I know why I'm doing it, and I need you to know that too. I know why you're doing it, he said. I've known since the second day. She caught the echo of what she'd said to him the week before. A small, genuine smile crossed her face. Fair, she said. The Garrison House dining room had been dressed for the occasion, white tablecloths, imported candles, flowers that must have been shipped at considerable expense from somewhere that wasn't having a drought. Silas Drummond stood near the door, receiving guests like a man at his own coronation, silver watch chain, gleaming face in its most practiced configuration of warm authority. He greeted Caleb with expansive surprise. Mr. Holt, I'm glad you came. I wasn't certain you would. I almost didn't. Caleb kept his voice flat, diminished. Performing the beaten man wasn't comfortable, but it was precise work, and he was precise when precision was required. I've been thinking about what you said. Drummond's eyes sharpened with the particular attention of a predator sensing submission. And I'm trying to be realistic about the situation. He looked at the room, the fine dinner, the investors at the far table, the whole elaborate performance of Drummond's certainty. Some things aren't winnable. A wise conclusion. Drummond was careful, not triumphant, not yet. We should talk later. I think we can reach an arrangement that suits both parties. He smiled. Tonight is a celebration. Enjoy yourself, Mr. Holt. Caleb moved into the room and found Aldridge near the window. Their exchange was brief and coded a nod from Aldridge that said Carver has the documents and a nod from Caleb that said Molly's statement was delivered this afternoon. 2 conversations, no words. Vivian arrived 20 minutes later. She wore a dress he hadn't seen before, gray, blue, simpler than the occasion probably demanded, which somehow made her more striking than anyone else in the room. She looked tired in a particular way, the way an actress looks tired before a performance that requires everything. He caught her eye across the room, and she looked at him for just a moment, steady and certain, and then she turned toward Drummond. Caleb positioned himself to watch. It was remarkable what she did. He knew her, he had come to know her quite well. In 3 weeks of close work, and he could see the effort underneath the performance. She moved through the room as if slightly defeated, as if the evening were an obligation she was honoring out of politeness. When Drummond found her, which he did quickly because Drummond always went to the person he had most recently been thinking about, she spoke to him with the careful, slightly broken dignity of a woman who had lost. "I've been thinking," Caleb heard her say, moving close enough to hear, without appearing to watch, "about what's practical." "That's a very sensible frame," Drummond said. "I've been fighting a battle I can't win." She looked down at her glass. This isn't easy to say, but I think it may be time for me to consider whether Harrow's Bend is the right place for my work." Drummond went very still. Then he did something Caleb hadn't expected. He put a hand on her arm briefly with something that was almost genuine. Almost. "Dr. Calloway, that must have been difficult to reach." It was. Her voice was perfectly calibrated, not theatrical, just honest sounding, in the way that good performance always is. "I've been wondering if I misjudged things. You. The town. I came in ready for a fight that perhaps wasn't what I thought it was." Drummond was quiet for a moment. Caleb watched his face, the calculation behind the warmth, the assessment of whether this was real and what to do with it. "Then I'd like to speak with you privately. Later, when the dinner is less formal. I think we may have gotten off on very wrong footing, and I'd like the chance to reset." "I'd be open to that," she said. The dinner itself was Drummond's performance. He was magnificent at it, Caleb would grant him that. He rose and gave a speech that combined civic pride with personal modesty in proportions that made both seem genuine. He introduced Aldridge and Carver as visionary partners, and the crowd received them warmly. He spoke about the railroad with the detailed knowledge of a man who had spent months in negotiations, and every fact he cited was accurate, which made the omissions harder to spot. Caleb sat at the far end of the table and ate and watched and waited. It was Edmund Carver who changed the room. Carver was a heavy-set man with white sideburns and the measured movements of someone who had learned that rushing was expensive. He had been quiet throughout the evening, affable, attentive, asking no questions that seemed pointed. Then, as the dessert plates were being cleared, he said with the off-handedness of a man making conversation, "Mr. Drummond, I've been looking over the property documentation for the railroad. Quite thorough work, very complete. One question." He produced a paper calmly, without urgency. "The water rights for the Holt property. I see they are listed as part of the acquisition. Could you walk me through the basis for that?" The room changed, not dramatically, no sudden silence, no theatrical pause. Just a slight shift in temperature, the way the room changes when something important is said, and people aren't sure yet whether to notice. Drummond looked at the paper. "Of course, the Holt estate is in the process of foreclosure, the terms of the loan agreement." "Yes, I've read the loan agreement." Carver's voice was mild. "Specifically the third page, paragraph 7. He paused, and in the mildness was precise and cold. "Perhaps you could explain how the water rights are included in the acquisition, given that paragraph." A silence. Real this time. Drummond looked at the paper. At Carver. At the paper again. And Caleb, watching from 15 feet away, saw the calculation, the rapid internal triage of a man determining how much damage was done and whether it was salvageable. He made a mistake. "There may be some ambiguity in the language," Drummond said. "These things happen in complex transactions, nothing that can't be." "There's no ambiguity." Carver set the paper down. "I've had legal counsel review it. The water rights were explicitly excluded from the collateral, which means the representations made to my partners and me about the scope of the acquisition were incorrect." A pause. "I'd like to understand how that happened." Every eye in the room was on Drummond. He was very good. The control held, the face remained composed, the voice stayed measured. But something underneath had shifted, and the people watching him could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. "Edmund," he said with the warmth of a man trying to redirect a conversation among friends, "I think this is better discussed in private. I think it's better discussed now." Carver's tone was not aggressive. It was the worst thing certain. "I also have a document I received this afternoon, a sworn statement from a woman named Molly Creed, who is an employee, or rather, whose husband is an employee of yours." This statement describes several events in this valley over the past 2 years that I find, he paused, selecting his word carefully, troubling. The room went very quiet. Drummond looked once at the doors at the back of the dining room. Looking for Creed, Caleb realized. Looking for the reassurance of muscle in the room. Creed wasn't there. Caleb had sent Amos to the hotel's rear entrance 2 hours earlier with a message for the men waiting there. The message was simple. Whatever Drummond is paying you, he's paying it with money he won't have by morning. Make your own decisions. He didn't know if it had worked, but Creed was not in the dining room, and that was the only thing that mattered right now. Drummond made one more attempt. I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding. There has been. Aldrich spoke for the first time from across the table. We've been misled about the terms of a major investment. That's not a misunderstanding, Mr. Drummond. That's a fraud. He glanced at Carver. I think we should let the lawyers determine the specifics. But as of tonight, the Texas Central Railroad is withdrawing from the current proposal. The silence that followed was absolute. Drummond left the dining room without running. That was his one remaining dignity. He walked steady and straight back through the watching crowd and out the door, and no one moved to stop him because no one knew yet what stopping him would mean. Caleb found Vivian in the hallway. She was standing with her back against the wall, her hands at her sides, breathing in the slow, controlled way of someone who has been holding something very tight and is carefully letting it go. He came and stood in front of her. He didn't ask how she was because he could see how she was. The dinner went well, he said. A sound came from her that was almost a laugh. The dinner. She stopped. Her eyes were bright. Yes, the dinner went well. I watched you talk to him. He stopped finding words. You were remarkable. I was terrified. She looked up at him. I kept thinking about what he'd done to this valley, to those families, to Molly, and I wanted to. She stopped again. I was very controlled. You were. He told me things. She reached into the small bag at her hip and produced a folded paper covered in her handwriting. While the dinner was going on, he thought he was being magnanimous, explaining to the conceding opponent how the game worked. He told me about the St. Louis scheme. He told me about the barn fire. Her jaw tightened. He was proud of it. Under all the charm, he's genuinely proud of what he's built here, regardless of how he built it. Caleb took the paper, looked at it. This is documentation. This is documentation for whatever legal proceedings follow. She met his eyes. Aldrich said he'd cooperate. Carver will want his money back from somewhere. There are people with significant financial motivation to ensure Drummond faces consequences. She paused. I don't know if he'll go to prison. I don't know if the law here can manage it, but he's broken Caleb. Tonight the foundation cracked. From down the hall, they could hear the dining room beginning to recover voices. Movement, the sound of a room processing something enormous. Nora is in there, Caleb said. She'll make sure everyone understands what happened. I know. A pause. Amos, at the ranch with Molly. She'll be all right. Good. She breathed out slowly. The documents, your mother's clause, are at the ranch and fully documented with Fletcher. The ranch is safe. The water rights are mine. He paused. Ours, if you... He stopped. She looked at him. If you wanted, he said carefully, to rebuild the clinic on Holt land. There's a building near the creek that's in better shape than everything else. Amos thinks it was an old stone dairy house, which means it's cool in summer and it's solid. He was looking at a point slightly past her shoulder. This isn't a condition or a... He stopped entirely, started again. My mother's letter said to take care of you and let you take care of me. I've been trying to figure out what that looks like practically. Vivian Calloway looked at him. The hallway was lit by 2 wall lamps, and from somewhere the faint sound of a fiddle starting up. Someone in the dining room had decided that if there was going to be a celebration, it might as well be one, and she looked at him with those gray eyes that saw everything and gave very little away. A stone dairy house, she said. It would need work, but the bones are good. She was quiet for a moment. My father's journals are in your barn. Safe as anything. And Amos has been waiting for someone new to take care of. He'll be insufferable about it. She reached up and touched his face, one brief certain gesture, her hand against his jaw. We should go back in, she said. There's going to be a great deal to manage tonight. I know. She dropped her hand, started toward the dining room, then stopped half-turned. Caleb. Yes. When this is over, when Drummond is gone and the clinic is built and the ranch is solvent and Amos is insufferably content. She looked at him. We'll talk about the rest, about what this is. A pause. I want to. I'm not saying I don't. I know, he said. She nodded once and walked back into the noise and light. Amara. Drummond was gone by morning. No one saw him go. The hotel discovered his room empty and his bill unpaid when the morning maid came through at 6. Sheriff Briggs, when asked about it, said he was not aware of any outstanding warrants and therefore had no authority to act, which was technically true and practically dishonest. But Briggs was already calculating his own position in a valley where Drummond's money was no longer the primary force. By mid-morning, word had reached Caleb at the ranch via Nora Whitfield. Drummond had left on the night stage, heading east toward Caldwell City, with 2 bags and his silver watch chain and nothing else. He was gone. Caleb sat with that for a while on the porch in his mother's chair, with the creek making its steady sound in the cottonwoods below. Amos came and leaned on the fence rail, and they were quiet together for a few minutes in the way they'd gotten comfortable with. She really gone? Amos asked finally. Aldridge confirmed it this morning. The railroad partnership is officially dissolved. Drummond's land holdings are in legal limbo. He's left a mess of debts and mortgages that his own bank can't cover. It'll take months to untangle, but the people he cheated will have recourse. Caleb looked at the creek. The water rights are clear. The note on the ranch Aldridge connected us with a legitimate bank in Caldwell City. We can refinance properly. Amos was quiet. And Miss Calloway? She'll be here this afternoon. We're going to look at the stone dairy building. I already cleaned it out, Amos said. Caleb looked at him. When Beno, 2 weeks ago. The old foreman kept his eyes on the horizon. I could see which way things were heading. Caleb turned back to the creek. You're insufferable. Your mother thought so too. She kept me anyway. Vivian came in the afternoon as she had said. She walked the stone dairy building with Caleb, while Amos manufactured errands elsewhere with transparent purposefulness, and she ran her hands over the walls 18 inches of limestone cool, even in August heat, and looked at the creek through the single window and didn't say anything for a long time. It's better than the clinic on 2nd Street, she said finally. The bones are good. Yes, she turned. It'll need proper ventilation. A surgery area, a recovery room, storage for pharmaceuticals that need to stay cool. The stone helps, but it's not enough in summer. She was thinking aloud, already inhabiting the space. And proper lighting. Natural where possible. She paused. There's going to be more work for a while. People who've been going to Fenwick will need assessment. Molly Creed. She stopped. She'll need ongoing care, the kind that isn't just stitches. She can stay on the property. There's a room in the house. Vivian looked at him. Until she's steady enough to decide what she wants to do, he said. It's not, he stopped. My mother would have offered it. I'm offering it. A pause. You're becoming your mother. That's the best thing anyone has said to me in 11 years. She smiled, genuine, uncomplicated, the smile of a woman who has been tightly wound for 2 years and is very slowly unwinding. She turned back to the window in the creek and the light coming through the cottonwoods. I wrote to my mother's oldest friend this week, she said, in Philadelphia. I told her I'd found something worth staying for. She paused. I didn't specify what. Caleb said nothing. He stood in the cool stone room and watched her look at the creek and thought about staying. About how staying required a decision you made again every day. About how he had been making that decision for 3 weeks now and had not once regretted it, and how that was entirely new to him. Vivian, he said, and he. She turned. He crossed the room. He was not a man who moved toward things easily. He'd spent 11 years moving away, but he was done practicing that particular skill. He took her face in his hands gently, the way you hold something you are afraid of breaking and have decided to hold anyway. And she looked at him with gray eyes that were clear all the way through. No calculation, no assessment, just the steady, honest gaze of a woman who has decided. He kissed her. She kissed him back. Outside, the creek ran and the cottonwoods moved in the slight afternoon wind, and a mockingbird somewhere in the trees sang 3 notes and waited for an answer. When they separated, she was still looking at him. That took you long enough, she said. I was being careful. You don't have to be careful with me. She took his hand. I'm a physician. I know how to handle things that are fragile. He looked at their joined hands. I'm not sure I'm fragile. No, but you've been treating yourself like you are. She pressed his hand slightly. Stop. He nodded. Outside the mockingbird sang again. Tell me about your mother, he said, all of her. Everything your father wrote in those journals. Start from the beginning. She looked at him with an expression he was still learning to read. Surprise, pleasure, the particular warmth of being asked for the thing you most want to give. That will take a very long time, she said. I'm not going anywhere. She leaned against his shoulder and began there in the cool stone room, with the creek outside and the light falling through the window, and the whole long future of the valley opened ahead of them like land after rain. October came to Harrow's Bend like a second chance. The summer heat broke first as a rumor, 3 days of slightly cooler mornings, the temperature only reaching brutal in the afternoons instead of by 8, and then broke completely in a thunderstorm that rolled in from the north on the second Saturday of the month and drenched the valley for 12 hours straight. Caleb stood on the ranch house porch and watched it come and felt the rain hit his face and did not go inside. The creek rose. The cottonwoods went gold. The drought was not ended by one storm, but it was interrupted, and sometimes that's what you need. Not the solution, just the interruption. The stone dairy building was finished in 3 weeks, which was faster than Caleb had expected, and exactly as fast as Amos had predicted. The work was collective in a way that surprised him. Tom Pierce and his eldest son showed up one morning with tools and spent 2 full days on the roof. 4 families from the valley's eastern edge came for a Saturday, 30 people with hammers and lumber, and a wagon of food that Nora Whitfield supervised with military authority. Even some of Drummond's former tenants appeared, men who had worked his land and were now uncertain where they stood, and chose to answer the question with a day of labor on behalf of the woman who had treated their families. This is strange, Caleb said to Vivian, watching a man he'd never met carefully planning a window frame. It's not strange at all, she said. People have been wanting to do something for 2 years. They just needed something to do. The clinic opened on the first day of October. Nothing formal. Vivian simply unlocked the door at 7 in the morning, and there were 3 people already waiting. Because Nora had told the whole valley it was happening, and Nora's communications network was more reliable than the postal service. Isham. The legal proceedings against Drummond were complicated. He was found 6 weeks later in St. Louis. He had not in fact gone far, or perhaps his definition of far had narrowed when the money became insufficient for flight. 2 of Carver's lawyers were already there when he arrived, having coordinated with the St. Louis authorities, who had their own unfinished business with Silas Drummond going back to 1873. Caleb received a telegram from Aldridge, Drummond apprehended. St. Louis case reopened. Harrow's Bend testimony included. Recommend legal representation for civil claims, recommend Fletcher. Sheriff Briggs resigned his position 2 weeks after Drummond fled, citing personal reasons that everyone understood to be financial self-preservation. The county appointed a temporary marshal, a retired ranger named Colville, who came to the clinic in his first week to introduce himself and told Vivian, I've heard about what you did. My wife's a nurse. I'm inclined to think people like you should be left alone to do your work. It was not quite an apology for 2 years of enforced blindness, but it was a beginning. Fennick was gone before Drummond. He left in the night with his bush and his fraudulent credentials and his list of patients he had deliberately undertreated, and he did not leave a forwarding address. Vivian wrote a detailed report of his medical malpractice and submitted it to the county medical board and then the state board, and then kept writing letters until someone with the relevant authority wrote back. She was very good at writing letters until people with authority wrote back. You should rest, Caleb told her one evening in late October. They were at the kitchen table after supper, her with a stack of correspondence, him with the ranch accounts that were for the first time in years in a state that could reasonably be called manageable. I'll rest in December, she said, not looking up. You've said that every month since August. And each month I mean it more sincerely. She glanced at him. You're one to talk. Amos tells me you were in the south pasture until dark last Tuesday. The south fence needed. It always needs something. That's the nature of fences. She returned to her letter. We're both bad at resting. We've discussed this. We should get better at it. Probably. A pause. What would you do with rest if you had it? He thought about it. Fish, he said. The creek has good holes, Amos says. I haven't tried it yet. I'd like to see that. She looked up, and in her face was the warmth that had been building since that afternoon in the stone dairy building. Not incremental anymore, but steady, something that had found its level and settled there. I've never learned to fish. My childhood was very urban. I could teach you. You'd need patience. I have patience. I've spent 3 months rebuilding a ranch and a legal case, and whatever this is, he gestured between them, which requires more patience than either of the other things. She set down her pen. What is it, she asked. Now that we're on the other side, now that Drummond is in St. Louis and the valley is breathing again and the clinic is open. She met his eyes. What is this? He looked at her. He had gotten better over these months at not retreating from the significant, at letting things be named. It's the best thing in my life, he said. It's the reason I get up in the morning and after a night when the accounts worried me or the fence line was worse than I expected or I dreamed about Kansas. He stopped, found the words. You are why I don't want to be anywhere else. And I've spent 11 years being somewhere else, so I know the difference. She held his gaze. I wrote to my mother's friend again last week, she said. I told her I was going to stay in Harrow's Bend, that I'd found a home. You didn't tell her specifically? I told her his name, a slight color in her face. She wrote back that it sounded like I'd made a decision and she was relieved I'd stopped letting myself be so alone. Is she right? She's right. Vivian reached across the table and laid her hand over his. I've been alone for a very long time. By preference, mostly. I told myself I preferred it. She turned his hand over fingers lacing with his. I think I was wrong. I think we've both been wrong about a lot of things. Consistently and with great confidence. She smiled. It's one of the things we have in common. He stood, came around the table. She looked up at him with those clear gray eyes that had been seeing him clearly since almost the first day, and he thought again about his mother's letter, about the request it made, and felt for the first time that he was actually honoring it. Vivian, he said. Yes. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that I've thought about it carefully, and the answer matters very much to me, and I'm prepared for whatever you say, because you've made me better at that. He paused. But I'd prefer a particular answer. She looked at him. Ask. Marry me. He said it plainly, the way he said things that were true. Marry me and stay. Help me build this ranch and this valley and whatever comes next. Let me help you build the same. He paused. I don't have a ring. I have $43 and a ranch that's finally solvent, and a mother who loved you, and an insufferable foreman who already cleaned the dairy building 2 weeks before we asked him to. She looked at him for a long moment. He held her gaze steady and open in the way he'd learned to be. Yes, she said, simple, direct, absolute, the word of a woman who had considered and decided. He brought her to her feet and held her close there in his mother's kitchen, with the Texas night outside and the creek running in the dark below, and the silver lantern on the windowsill where he'd put it the first night he came home, its etched roses worn smooth by 40 years of his mother's careful hands. They were married in November when the cottonwoods had finished their gold, and the mornings had the clean, sharp edge of approaching winter. The church was full. Everyone came, the Valley families who had stood with them through the fight, the families who had stood with Drummond and were finding their way towards something different, strangers who had heard the story through some chain of telling that Nora Whitfield had certainly accelerated. Tom Pierce sat in the third row with his family, and little Clara, fully recovered, had been permitted to hold the flower basket, a responsibility she discharged with tremendous gravity. Molly Creed was there. She had stayed at the ranch through the fall, finding her feet corresponding with a sister in Missouri who hadn't known where she was. In late October, she'd received a letter that made her cry for an hour and then pack her bag with purpose. She was leaving for Missouri the following week. She came to the wedding because Vivian had asked her to come, and she sat in the back with the careful dignity of a woman who has been through considerable difficulty and is choosing day by day something different. Amos stood at the front of the church and produced a ring, a simple silver band that Caleb had not seen before. And when Caleb looked at him, the old foreman said quietly, "Your mother bought it 25 years ago. Said it was for the right woman at the right time." He pressed it into Caleb's hand. She was a patient, a woman. Caleb stood at the altar and watched Vivian walk toward him. She wore a simple dress in the blue-gray of her eyes, her dark auburn hair loose around her shoulders, and she walked the way she walked into every room with the particular assurance of a person who has decided to be present and means it. When she reached him, she looked up, and her face was quiet and certain, and full of the kind of happiness that doesn't need performance. "You're sure," he said too quietly for anyone else to hear. "I've been sure since the second day," she said. "I'm just now admitting it out loud." The Reverend asked the questions, and they answered them. The ring fit as if it had been made for her hand, which perhaps it had. Outside the church windows, the November sky was the particular pale blue of winter coming on, and somewhere in the cottonwoods along the creek, a mockingbird, the last one of the season, probably before the cold drove it south, sang a brief complicated phrase and went silent. The letter from Aldrich came in December. It arrived on a cold morning when frost had whitened the grass and the creek ran low and clear, and the stone clinic was warm from the small iron stove Amos had installed in September. Caleb was at the ranch when it arrived. He read it in the kitchen and then walked down to the clinic to find Vivian between patients. She looked at him when he came in. "Good news or complicated news?" "Aldridge," he said, "the Texas Central has finalized a new partnership agreement. The rail line will come through the valley as planned. The water access for the locomotives will be provided by the Holt Ranch under a 50-year fixed-rate agreement." He paused. "And the new station?" She watched him. "They're naming it," he said. "The station." "What are they naming it?" He handed her the letter. She read it. He watched her face the particular stillness that came before something significant and then the shift small and absolute. "Dorothea Station," she said. He had not been able to say it out loud yet. He nodded. "Your mother," she said quietly. "Aldridge says it was Carver's idea, that given the history of how the water access was secured, the clause she wrote, the way she prepared." He stopped. Tried again. "He said she was the one who made it possible, that naming the station after her was the appropriate acknowledgement." Vivian folded the letter carefully. She stood from her stool and came to him and put her arms around him, and he held her in the middle of her clinic with the frost on the windows and the stove ticking against the cold. "She'd have been embarrassed," he said into her hair. "She'd have been thrilled," Vivian said. "She'd have told you she was embarrassed, but she'd have been thrilled." He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere fully inhabited. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For believing her letter. For taking me seriously when I had no reason to be taken seriously." He pulled back to look at her. "For staying in this valley when you should have left. For keeping those records and writing those letters and building that case alone for 2 years, because if you hadn't, I'd have come home to a valley that was already fully Drummond's, and there would have been nothing left to fight for." She was quiet for a moment. "Your mother's letter said there would be someone worth staying for," she said. "I want you to know that before you arrived, I had decided to stay regardless. Not for a person, for the place, the work." She met his eyes. "But you made staying mean more than endurance. She stopped. "That matters. I want you to know it matters." He kissed her forehead. "You should go back to your patient." "I should." She didn't move immediately. "Tonight you're going to tell me everything about Kansas. The whole story, everything you've been keeping in the abbreviated version." "That's a difficult story." "I know. That's why we're doing it at home in front of the fire where no one else can hear it." She looked up at him. "You've been carrying it long enough. Let me carry some of it." "It's heavy. I'm strong." She stepped back, professional again, doctor again, the person she was in this space that was hers. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight?" He agreed. Oh, he told her that night. All of it, Danny Cole's the farmhouse, the morning after the badge, he'd sat down and walked away from the 4 years of trying to be no one in particular. She listened to all of it there in front of the fire in his mother's parlor, that was now their parlor, and she didn't flinch from any of it, and she didn't offer him easy absolution because she knew he'd reject that, and also because she was too honest to give it. What she said when he finished was, "You were 29 years old in a situation that had no good resolution, and you made the only decision available to you, and you've been treating yourself as if you made it callously when you've spent 11 years proving you didn't." She held his gaze. "Danny Coles is dead, and that's true, and it's terrible. But you turning yourself into nothing for 11 years doesn't change that and doesn't honor it. The only thing that honors it is living well. I'm working on that, he said. I know. I've watched you work on it. She took his hand. You're better at it than you think. They sat in the firelight for a long time, and the ranch was quiet around them, and outside the Texas winter had settled in for its long, cold stay. Caleb thought about his mother in this parlor, reading by lamplight, waiting for a letter that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. He thought about the 11 years he'd spent being somewhere else and told himself the thing he was still learning, to tell himself that the past was the past and the present was this and this was good. Spring came as it does. The valley woke slowly, first the creek rising with snowmelt from the hills to the north, then the cedar going a slightly more vivid green, then the wildflowers in the south pasture that Caleb had been warned about by Amos, and was still not quite prepared for bluebonnets. First, then Indian paintbrush, then a dozen varieties he didn't have names for. He walked through them one morning in early April and felt something his mother had described once in the letter he had read on the porch the night he came home. The land knows how to come back, she had written. It knows things we don't. Trust it. The cattle herd was rebuilt, not fully, not yet, but the foundation was there. The fences were sound. The barn roof had been properly replaced. The stone clinic was established, and the patient load was growing as the word spread beyond the valley that there was a real physician in Harrow's Bend, a thorough and committed one, who could be reached even in the middle of the night and who would come. Vivian had written 2 papers in the winter, one on wound care protocols she'd developed treating frontier injuries, one on the systematic misuse of medications as a tool of economic coercion. She described the Harrow's Bend situation anonymously, but specifically, and she was working on where to submit it. She read sections to Caleb in the evenings, and he listened and asked questions, and she revised, and he thought about his mother's letter and the specific instruction it had contained. Let her take care of you. I know that is harder. It was harder. He was learning. In June, Nora Whitfield organized the first proper community gathering since the crisis. She called it a celebration, and there was food and music and a tent that kept off the afternoon sun, and the whole valley seemed to appear. Families who had been afraid to leave their properties were out. Children ran between the wagon wheels. Tom Pierce's daughter Clara, fully recovered, ran faster than any of them and shrieked with joyful abandon about it. Former Drummond tenants stood in groups and talked carefully with their neighbors. Not everything forgiven, not everything resolved, but the conversations happening, which was where all resolution begins. Caleb stood at the edge of it all with Amos watching. Your mother would have done this, Amos said. I know. Would have planned every dish and worried for 3 days beforehand and acted completely surprised when it went well. The old foreman looked at the crowd. She always said a valley was the sum of its people, that the land was only as good as the community that worked it. He paused. I think she was right. I think she was right about most things. You're starting to sound like her. Caleb looked at him. You've said that before. It keeps being true. Amos turned back to the crowd. Your wife is standing in a circle of 6 women all trying to convince her to join the church auxiliary, and she looks like she would rather be doing surgery. Caleb looked. It was accurate. She'll manage. She always does. A pause. You're happy. It wasn't a question. Caleb considered answering it as if it were one and decided against it. Yes. Good. Amos crossed his arms with the satisfaction of a man whose prediction has been vindicated. I told your mother you'd come back better. She said she wasn't sure. I said I was. You were gambling. I was reading the evidence. The old foreman looked at him. You're your mother's son, Caleb. You always were. You just needed to stop running long enough to see it. Across the gathering, Vivian extricated herself from the auxiliary circle with the graceful firmness of a woman who has extensive practice in declining things she doesn't want, and began moving through the crowd in his direction, stopping at intervals to speak to patients. Former patients, people she'd treated once and hadn't seen since. Each exchange was warm and brief because she was efficient even at warmth, and the people she talked to left the conversation slightly steadier than when they'd entered it, which was the particular gift of someone who had spent a long time listening carefully. She reached him, looked up. The auxiliary wants me to lead a hygiene workshop for new mothers. Will you? Oh, of course I'll do the workshop. The auxiliary part is still under negotiation. She looked at the gathering at the tables of food and the children and the conversations happening. "This is good," she said simply. "Yes." He took her hand. "How is Clara Pierce? Growing, strong lungs, competitive?" She watched the child outrun two boys twice her size and felt the satisfaction of a physician whose work has compounded forward into the future. "She says she wants to be a doctor." "What did you tell her?" "I told her to read everything she could get her hands on and not let anyone tell her the things she wants are unavailable to her." She paused. Then her mother gave me a look that suggested I'd perhaps gotten specific too quickly. He laughed. She laughed too, that real laugh, the one that had been coming more easily since November, since the weight of 2 years of fighting had gradually lifted. "Walk with me," he said. They walked the edge of the gathering, out past the last wagon, into the long grass of the pasture, where the wildflowers were still holding on in the June heat. The creek glittered through the cottonwoods. The valley stretched away in every direction, green from the spring rains, alive in the particular comprehensive way of land that has been through difficulty and come back. "Your father's journals," Caleb said. "The paper you are writing. What about them? You should submit it. The one about medication misuse. There's a medical journal in Philadelphia. I saw the name in your stack of correspondence last week. You've been sitting on it." She was quiet. "You're afraid they'll know it's about you," he said. "I'm afraid they'll know it's about a woman practicing medicine in Texas and dismiss it on those grounds. Then submit it under V. Calloway, MD. No first name. Let them read the argument before they decide what it means that a woman made it." She looked at him. "That's not... It's strategic. Your mother's friend said the same thing. I'm not saying it's a fair. I'm saying it's the move." He paused. "And once it's accepted, they'll have to contend with what it means. That's the order of operations." She was quiet for a long moment. "You read my correspondence." "It was in the stack." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not." "No," he agreed, "I'm not. Because now I got to say that to you, and it's correct, and you know it's correct." He looked at her. "Submit the paper." She pressed her lips together, suppressing something. "You're bossy for a man who spent 11 years being no one. I learned from watching you. That's extremely unfair." But she was smiling, the particular smile that meant she was going to do the thing. They walked back toward the gathering as the afternoon began to cool back toward the noise and light of their neighbors assembled back toward an Amos, dispensing unsolicited opinions, and Nora managing the food table with the authority of a field general, and Clara Pierce shrieking triumphant in the grass. Caleb walked with his wife through the summer valley that had been his mother's and was now his and Vivian's and would be his children's someday. And he thought about the boy who had left this place 11 years ago, frightened and guilty, and certain that love was something other people got to have, and felt no particular kinship with him. He had ridden 500 miles to bury his mother. He had stayed a lifetime to honor her. And somewhere in the middle of that, in the water rights clause, hidden in a silver lantern, in a woman who came from Philadelphia to practice medicine on the frontier, in the courage of people who chose to stand when standing was dangerous, he had found what he had never expected to find. Not redemption, something better and more ordinary than redemption. Home. The Dorothea station opened 2 years later on a morning in October when the cottonwoods were gold and the air had that first clean edge of autumn. Half the valley was there, Caleb with Vivian beside him, Amos at his right shoulder, Nora somewhere in the crowd being central to everything without appearing to be. A train arrived, the first train to come through Harrow's Bend, its whistle cutting through the valley morning like a proclamation. The station's master read the name on the sign, Dorothea Station. Caleb looked at the sign at his mother's name in clean painted letters and felt something move through him that was not grief anymore, but something quieter and more lasting. The knowledge that she had been here, that what she'd built had survived her, that the water running through the valley still ran on terms she'd written in a document she'd hidden in plain sight for a son she'd believed in past all reasonable evidence. Vivian's hand found his. He looked at her. She was watching him with the particular quality of attention she brought to everything thorough present seeing. "She knew," Vivian said quietly. "She knew you'd find the lantern. She knew you'd figure out what to do with it. She knew you'd stay." She was patient. She was right. She squeezed his hand. "That's better than patient." The train was taking on water. Around them, the valley gathered and celebrated and began in its careful collective way to believe in its own future. A child ran past them too fast, full of the ordinary urgent business of being alive, and Vivian stepped aside with a physician's instinct, and Caleb steadied her, and they stood together in the middle of all of it. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked at the sign, at the valley, at the woman beside him. He thought about his mother in her chair on the porch watching the road. He thought about 11 years of getting it wrong. He thought about the moment on the porch the night he came home, when he read the letter the first time, and felt underneath the grief something he hadn't recognized until much later. Permission, he thought. She gave me permission to come back. "I'm thinking," he said, "that I should have come home sooner." Vivian looked at him steadily. "You came when you were ready." "I wasn't ready." "No." She turned toward the station, toward the train, taking on water for the long haul west toward the sign bearing his mother's name. "But you stayed anyway. That's the braver thing." She looked at him. "Your mother knew that." He nodded. He let himself believe it. Around them, Harrow's Bend continued becoming itself imperfect, fractious alive, the way communities do when they've come through difficulty and decided collectively and without ceremony to keep going. A mockingbird sang in the cottonwoods. Caleb Holt listened to it and stayed.